Subcommittee will come to order. First, I want to start by asking unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome everyone to the first hearing of the Rail Pipeline Hazardous Material Subcommittee. It is an honor to be chairman of the committee. It's been 8 years since I've held the gavel of a subcommittee. It's great to have this one, and I want to welcome Ranking Member Rick Crawford and all the new members of the subcommittee here. I look forward to working with the Ranking Member Crawford and members on both sides of the aisle, as well as staff, on the many issues that we have before the subcommittee, including pipeline safety reauthorization. We have a long tradition of bipartisanship, and I look forward to continuing that tradition here. This hearing is particularly important given the recent spate of pipeline incidents, both liquid and gas, that we have seen in recent years. Explosions and pipeline failures just in the past couple of years in Merrimack Valley, Dallas, Minneapolis, and locally here in Silver Spring have tragically killed many people and caused severe property damage. I want to acknowledge Congresswoman Lori Trahan and Congressman Seth Moulton, who will speak today about the Merrimack Valley tragedy and the impacts it has had on their constituents. From 1999 to 2018, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, PHMSA, reported 11,992 pipeline incidents, which resulted in 317 deaths, 1,302 injuries, and more than $8.1 billion in damages. Incidents increased nearly twofold from 1999 to 2018. This shows that we still have much work to do to ensure the safety of our pipeline system, which must be our top priority. First and foremost, on the safety front, is the expeditious completion of outstanding rulemakings from the 2011 and 2016 pipeline safety reauthorizations. I do want to note the progress that PHMSA Administrator Elliott have made since the subcommittee's June 2018 oversight hearing and the outstanding mandates from the 2011 and 2016 bills. But it remains unacceptable that critical rules like the hazardous liquids rule, gas transmission line rule, and the valve and rupture detection rule have not been implemented. PHMSA's and USDOT's inaction continue to place lives at risk, and that is completely unacceptable. They must do a better job getting the regulations completed expeditiously. Given the delay in completing these important rulemakings, we need to examine PHMSA's rulemaking process to determine if there are obstacles to more swift promulgations of regulations, including the unique benefit cost analysis that PHMSA is required to undertake as part of any rulemaking. I'm pleased to welcome my good friend Jennifer Hamady here on behalf of National Transportation Safety Board. NTSB recently came out with their 2019 to 2020 Most Wanted list of safety improvements. I look forward to hearing from NTSB about pipeline safety issues on this list in ways that Congress can address those issues. Additionally, NTSB currently has 36 open pipeline safety recommendations. 24 of those recommendations are to PHMSA. 3 of the most wanted recommendations to PHMSA are designated as open, unacceptable response, including finding cracks, defects in pipes. It's important that we move quickly to address NTSB's recommendations, many of which have remained unaddressed for decades, and determine if there are any new safety regulations needed. We also need to continue to assess the workforce capacity of PHMSA and ensure that PHMSA is properly staffed. This assessment should not only examine whether PHMSA adequately retains and has enough expertise and experience among pipeline inspector staff, but also whether PHMSA has enough technical and regulatory staff as well. I look forward to hearing from the safety advocates on the second panel about the safety gaps they believe exist and need to be addressed. I also want to consider how industry can take proactive steps to work with communities and first responders to help prepare and train local emergency personnel in the case of emergencies. It is important to ensure that robust emergency management and information sharing plans and procedures are in place should something go wrong, like it did in my district in Romeoville, Illinois, when a pipeline spilled more than 6,427 barrels of oil in 2010. Finally, I have heard concerns that some of PHMSA's regulations are woefully outdated and inhibit industry innovation in new areas. Therefore, it is important to listen to industry stakeholders on some of the challenges they face. I look forward to considering reasonable requests about how we can modernize our regulations while holding bad actors accountable and not compromise safety. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Crawford, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski. As we begin our work to reauthorize the 2016 Pipes Act, I look forward to working with you and the members of this subcommittee to improve pipeline safety through a balanced regulatory approach. The United States has the largest network of energy pipelines in the world and supplies 65% of the energy we use every day. The oil and natural gas industry supports over 10.3 million jobs and 8% of the total U.S. economy. Continued industry investments will provide more high-paying jobs for a diversifying workforce. As the world's leading energy exporter, the United States can continue to bolster our economy and our allies' energy security by exporting our oil and natural gas. Just last week, I was proud to join 390 of my colleagues in passing H.R. 1616, the European Energy Security and Diversification Act, to facilitate the export of U.S. energy resources to Central and Eastern European countries. Every year, more than 2.6 million miles of pipelines safely deliver large volumes of natural gas and liquid petroleum products across the United States. A safe pipeline system is essential to relieve the burdens on other modes of our transportation network. Pipelines remain one of the safest and most cost-effective means to transport large quantities of our nation's energy products, and oversight of the Pipelines Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, safety programs is a top priority for the subcommittee in achieving our goal of zero pipeline incidents. The 2016 Pipes Act was bipartisan and made progress towards ensuring the safety of pipelines and the communities around them. The 2016 Pipes Act provided regulatory certainty for our citizens, the safety community, and the industry stakeholders. Today we'll hear from PHMSA about the progress to date, as well as pending actions on the mandates from both the 2011 and 2016 legislation. While I appreciate the progress that's been made, there is still work to be done. The 2011 law included 42 congressional mandates, of which 34 are complete. The 2016 Pipes Act contained 19 mandates, 16 of which are complete. I especially look forward to hearing from the industry about its safety initiatives to ensure best practices for inspections, detecting leaks, and other important safety initiatives. In closing, let me thank our witnesses for coming today to discuss the issues concerning pipeline safety and how we can continue to improve pipeline safety. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I now call on the chair of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio, for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, a small token to celebrate your...
Thank you. Can I open it now?
Yes, you can even use it. It's functional. It's smaller than that one. But
so you're telling me you gave away what's in here?
Well, I think you've been at some of the other hearings when I gave them those.
Thank you.
Not a big surprise. Brief remarks. I would echo concerns raised by both the chair and the ranking member. Last year, 8 people were killed, 92 injured in 633 pipeline incidents. We're going to hear from the representative of the worst incident of the last year, the most serious one in Merrimack Valley, where somehow a high-pressure gas got into the low-pressure system. Then that damaged 131 structures, destroyed 5 homes, injured 21 people, and killed an 18-year-old. These things just shouldn't happen. There are other ongoing investigations with the NTSB, and we always look forward to their advice in these matters. The administrator is also here. I met with the administrator recently to discuss progress on the rulemakings. It's simply unacceptable to have safety-critical rules that were passed by Congress 8 years ago lingering somewhere. Apparently, 5 have moved out of the agency, and they're somewhere in, I don't know, OMB, the Secretary's office. There are rumors that there's some sort of a ledger, and the cost of regulations can't exceed a certain amount, and so I'm not sure what's holding them up. I don't know what value the Secretary or one of the trolls at OMB puts on their life, but when you lose that many people in a year, and we have safety critical rules, particularly leak detection and other things that are not yet accomplished, not yet promulgated, you've got to question what's going on, and we're not going to rest easy until we get this all done and we make this system safer across the country and prevent these sorts of incidents. We'll be looking for ideas on additional, if necessary, rulemaking. We certainly want to look at ways that we can work with the industry in doing rulemaking, but it is ultimately a regulated industry, and the regulators must protect the public. I do not believe in self-regulation, even with best practices. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. Thank you for the gavel.
Yes.
I will proudly display that in
I
my
ordered
office.
them online. They looked a little bigger than that.
Yeah, it's a little smaller than I think.
You might use that
this
one. Yeah, just put that on your office somewhere.
Yes, I will. Thank you. Before proceeding to our 2 witness panels, I'd like to see. We have Congresswoman Lori Trahan, Congressman Seth Moulton may be here, but both of them are going to speak about the Merrimack Valley tragedy and its impact on their districts and constituents. I want to ask unanimous consent that our colleagues' full statements be included in the record, and without objection, so ordered. And we will proceed with Representative Trahan. So welcome.
Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Crawford, members of the subcommittee, thank you for allowing me to testify today on an issue that has been weighing on so many hearts and minds in my district for the past 28 weeks, ever since a series of preventable errors triggered gas-fueled explosions across Lawrence, Andover, and North Andover, Massachusetts. The explosions destroyed homes and damaged businesses, caused multiple injuries, and took a young life. To briefly recap events, at 4 in the afternoon on Thursday, September 13th, a cascade of explosions rocked over 130 homes and businesses, burning several to the ground. Terrified residents had no idea what was happening, or why, or when it would stop. While the National Transportation Safety Board won't issue its final report and recommendations for several months, its interim report revealed shocking details that demand action. Columbia Gas of Massachusetts, a subsidiary of NiSource, was replacing gas pipelines in the area. Major errors were made throughout the process. One of the biggest was the mishandling of a gas pressure sensor line. This sensor signals to an automated system whether to adjust gas flow. However, when the new pipeline was installed, the sensor line remained in the old, abandoned pipeline. The lack of flow in the old line led the sensor to call for more and more gas in the new line. Across the country, people saw the consequence on the evening news. This should have never happened. In November, the board recommended that Columbia Gas revamp its engineering review process to more securely plan for whatever public safety may be at risk. It recommended the company records be updated with critical details, such as location of sensor lines as industry standard practice calls for. The board also recommended that the company implement a management of change process to identify and mitigate potential risks ahead of project work. Finally, the board urged Massachusetts to repeal a law that exempted gas companies from securing the seal of a professionally licensed engineer on these projects. Indeed, it is my understanding that more than a dozen states have such exemptions in place today. To their credit, the Commonwealth's governor and legislature quickly acted to repeal this exemption. Furthermore, I'm told that Columbia Gas is in contact with the board to implement the industry recommendations. Nevertheless, I urge the committee to be bold by strengthening safety standards and mandating professional engineer reviews. Over the past 7 months, I've met with many victims of the Merrimack Valley gas explosions. I heard stories of courage and commitment, nowhere more so than in Lawrence, a community known as the City of Immigrants. One local hero, police officer Ivan Soto, learned that his home was one of those on fire. But like so many first responders, once he knew his family was safe, Officer Soto returned to duty to help as many people as he could. Doctors Yeri Park and Chelsea Harris were graduate medical residents at Greater Lawrence Family Health Center. Neither is from Lawrence. Dr. Park is from Los Angeles, in fact. But they and their colleagues sprang into action to help victims and offer surge support as the local hospital already had its hands full. But despite their heroic efforts, there is no replacing some of what was lost. Luis Suazo owns a bodega. He is one of many first-generation immigrants who started his own successful business in Lawrence, but he could lose it all. His regular customers are still financially strapped from the disaster. That's a feeling he is intimately familiar with himself. He's currently navigating an extended damage claims review process. Plus, quite frankly, many residents are just fearful that there may be more explosions, and so they stay indoors. That means less foot traffic and fewer customers in the Suazo market. Finally, Lionel Rondon. Lionel was a student celebrating his new driver's license that day. Then a home exploded, and debris from a chimney collapsed onto the car he was in, killing him. He was 18. His sister, Luciani, testified at a Senate field hearing in Lawrence last November. She said, "We hope there will be justice for Lionel and for the community. Nobody should ever have to go through what my family has gone through ever again." I invite any of the members of the committee to come to the Merrimack Valley and see the damage for yourself, and also meet those who suffered losses, as well as those who came to the rescue. Finally, I implore this committee to approve a strong reauthorization of the Pipeline Safety Act this year. I stand ready to work with you on legislation to prevent such a disaster from happening again. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Trahan, and we now have right in nick of time, Mr. Moulton. So I'll give you a couple seconds there to get
No,
ready, and
we're
I
ready to
will-
go.
We'll
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman DeFazio, Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Graves, Ranking Member Crawford, thank you all for inviting me here today. On the 13th of last September, workers for Columbia Gas, replacing a system of 100-year-old cast iron pipes, failed to account for a pressure sensor. The lines were overpressurized and set off a series of disasters that brought carnage I thought I had left behind in Iraq to the Merrimack Valley. Witnesses described houses exploding. Just repeat that phrase, houses exploding. At one exploding house, a chimney landed on a car and crushed a young man inside it to death. The explosions and the fires that happened in the aftermath injured 23 people, and in a second turned 30,000 folks in Merrimack Valley into temporary refugees. All told, 7,700 people couldn't return to their homes, including 2,683 children, many for months. The story that day was one of devastation. It didn't take long, however, to turn into a story of inspiration. Strangers took in neighbors, Red Cross workers, local leaders, and first responders banded together to help out. By the end of the first night, it seemed like everyone in the Merrimack Valley was pitching in to help us recover. Everyone except the company that caused the explosion. Columbia Gas dawdled in the moments and days immediately after this tragedy. And when I asked their president why, during a Senate Commerce Committee field hearing, he assured me that public safety was one of the company's core values. But shortly thereafter, we learned the truth from a courageous whistleblower who retired 3 months prior. Before the explosions, that employee, Mr. Bart Medeiros, warned the general manager and another senior employee that staffing and oversight decisions made by Columbia Gas would create a situation in which they, and I quote, didn't have enough people to respond and provide safe, reliable natural gas. But that wasn't all. Columbia Gas had also reduced the number of staff monitoring gas pressure in the Merrimack Valley. The company stopped requiring technicians on site at construction projects to monitor gas distribution lines. And the National Transportation Safety Board found that the company used a field engineer who had, and I quote, limited knowledge about the importance of regulator sensing lines to supervise the project. This oversight, or lack of oversight, caused workers to improperly bypass critical pipeline pressure sensing lines, which led directly to the explosion. Last month, 10 families were still in temporary housing. Small businesses faced the prospect of closing their doors because of the rate at which Columbia Gas paid their claims. And Columbia Gas has still not replaced appliances beyond merely patching them up as winter approached. In the 6 months since, Columbia Gas has put together a long-term recovery plan that focuses on bettering its emergency response and pipeline safety initiatives, but the damage wasn't just to people and to homes. Peace of mind exploded that day as well. Now parents have cause to think twice when they hear the click of the stovetop or the rumble of a hot water heater. They wonder if their house might blow up. It's up to Congress to rebuild that peace of mind. As this committee considers the reauthorization of the Natural Gas Pipeline Safety Act, we must improve safety protocols and oversight of operators like Columbia Gas. And the President needs to step up and work with Congress, too. Let's all work together to rebuild America's aging infrastructure like the century-old pipes running through the Merrimack Valley. Let's eliminate professional engineer license exemptions for public utility work. Let's make sure a professional engineer approves all public utility engineering drawings. Let's hold state and federal pipeline safety regulators accountable for sufficient staffing. Let's explore the lack of oversight by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which gave the Massachusetts system a rating of 97.4 out of 100 just 1 month before the explosions. Let's make the regulation of pipe replacement mandatory. And rethink how the administration could be more efficient as it weighs costs and benefits for new regulations, because no cost is greater than that of young men, of young Americans, like the young man who was killed, 18-year-old Leonel Robson. Let's do it for Merrimack, let's do it together, and let's do it now. Thank you, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton, and thank both of you for shining a bright light on what we need to keep in mind as we're working on reauthorizing the pipeline safety bill. So thank you both very much for your testimony. We will now welcome our first panel of witnesses as you get ready to come up here. The Honorable Howard Skip Elliott, the Administrator of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and the Honorable Jennifer Hammondy, Board Member of the National Transportation Safety Board. I want to ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record, and without objection, so ordered. I thank our witnesses for being here today for this first panel. Since your written testimony has been made part of the record, subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And we will start with Mr. Elliott, and you will recognize for 5 minutes. Microphone.
Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, Chairman Lipinski, and Ranking Member Crawford, and esteemed members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I look forward to updating the subcommittee on the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's progress in closing open congressional mandates and executing our broader safety mission. Last summer, this subcommittee expressed its frustration loud and clear regarding the outstanding congressional mandates on pipeline and hazardous material safety. We heard you, and we're working hard to ensure our nation's pipeline system remains safe while addressing the critical safety mandates received from Congress. Of the 12 remaining mandates from the 2011 and 2016 Pipeline Safety Acts, there were 61 in total. 4 are tied to reports and other actions, and the remaining 8 are tied to in-progress rulemaking efforts. Those mandates from the 2011 Act, those that have been open the longest, are being addressed by 3 of PHMSA's upcoming rulemakings for gas transmission pipelines, hazardous liquid pipelines, and rupture detection and valves. PHMSA continues to make progress on these rules, with the liquid pipeline safety rule having moved out of DOT for final review last month. PHMSA has also completed its work on the gas transmission pipeline final rule, and it's now undergoing internal administrative review. I understand that many of you and many of our stakeholders may feel like we're not moving fast enough on rulemakings. As a safety practitioner, I appreciate and I share those concerns. As PHMSA administrator, it's my responsibility to prioritize and pursue those rulemakings that will provide the greatest safety impact and have the highest likelihood of preventing events that could negatively impact people and the environment. To that end, I refer the members of this subcommittee to my written testimony regarding the details of 2 important safety mandates closed since we last convened, dealing with comprehensive oil spill response plans for railroads and the transport of lithium-ion batteries by air. In addition, we issued a final rule to modernize technologies for plastic pipelines that we hope will further accelerate aging distribution gas line replacement. In addition to congressional mandates, many of PHMSA's rules must also address recommendations from the National Transportation Safety Board that relate to complex safety matters. Our rules also address recommendations from the U.S. Government Accountability Office and our own safety findings. Furthermore, we must make sure our regulations account for known safety issues, technological feasibility, and cost effectiveness. PHMSA holds public meetings and workshops prior to rulemakings using the information gathered to craft the most effective rules possible. Such collaboration well in advance of the rulemaking process allows us to identify concerns and potential solutions to allocate our limited resources where they're needed the most. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to get a rule ready for publication, and we're making positive movements towards completing our mandates. Safety is the highest priority for the U.S. Department of Transportation and for PHMSA, and we're continuing to work hard to publish the rules and reports that will complete our mandates. We're also committed to addressing safety issues on all fronts. I'm pleased to say that while making progress on mandates, PHMSA's oversight role is continuing to have a positive impact on safety. Thanks to our integrity management requirements, pipeline operators have conducted over 90,000 repairs in high-consequence areas. Our field efforts are working, too. Last year, PHMSA conducted over 12,000 days of inspections and investigations of pipeline systems. These field activities are helping to improve the safety, as evidenced in the number of reported pipeline incidents, which for 2018 was below the 5-year average, even with PHMSA's expanded regulatory oversight of underground natural gas storage facilities. Additionally, the same data shows that both pipeline-related fatalities and the net volume spilled from hazardous liquid pipelines was also below the 5-year average, down 33% and 21% respectively, although we know that even one pipeline-related casualty is one too many. These facts, while notable, do not give me reason to pause during our ongoing safety mission at PHMSA. And even though we use statistics to help us measure improvements in safety, it's the vivid reminder of incidents in places like Bellingham, Marshall, San Bruno, Aliso Canyon, and Merrimack Valley that serve as our motivation and commitment for working even harder to improve pipeline safety. Thank you again for inviting me to today's hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I'll recognize Ms. Almendy.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Crawford, and Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting the National Transportation Safety Board to testify today. The NTSB is an independent federal agency charged by Congress with investigating major transportation disasters, including pipelines. We determine the probable cause of accidents and issue safety recommendations aimed at preventing future tragedies and saving lives. Pipelines are one of the safest and most efficient modes of transportation, but when safety standards are inadequate or disregarded, or when federal or state agencies fail to conduct proper oversight, the consequences can be devastating. During this hearing, I will be asked about a number of NTSB investigations, so I want to take a moment to remind us why we are here. Lives were lost. Families will never be the same. So on behalf of the NTSB, I want to once again extend our deepest condolences to those who lost loved ones or who have been impacted by pipeline tragedies. Now I want to thank each of you. Over the years, Congress has been a true partner in advancing many of the NTSB's safety recommendations. Working together, we've saved lives. In 1998, we investigated a gas pipeline explosion and fire in Virginia. A family was spending their first night in their new home. Tragically, the wife was killed, and the husband and both children were injured. We determined that had an excess flow valve been installed on the line, the accident would never have occurred. The NTSB had been recommending the installation of excess flow valves for nearly 30 years. In 2006, this committee took action and mandated their installation on new single-family residential lines. In 2012, you expanded that requirement to multifamily residences and small commercial facilities. I am proud to say that in 2016, we closed that recommendation favorably following PHMSA's issuance of the final rule. Now we turn our attention to closing 36 open NTSB safety recommendations, 3 of which are designated as open unacceptable action. Many of these are included in our most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. Some were addressed in the 2011 and 2016 acts, but haven't been implemented. Yet tragedies continue to occur. 2 significant NTSB recommendations urge the installation of automatic shutoff or remote control valves in high-consequence areas and address repeated failures of pipeline operators to detect ruptures and leaks and take appropriate action. In 2010, a gas transmission pipeline ruptured and ignited in San Bruno, California. It took the operator 95 minutes to stop the flow of gas and severely hindered emergency response operations. Tragically, 8 people were killed and many more were injured. 38 homes were destroyed, 70 others were damaged. That same year, a pipeline rupture occurred in Marshall, Michigan, and this committee investigated that accident. That rupture released nearly 1 million gallons of heavy crude oil in surrounding waterways and communities. It took the operator 17 hours to identify the rupture and shut down the line. And in 2015, we investigated a release of 4,000 gallons of gasoline from a pipeline in Centerville, Virginia. The operator didn't detect the leak for 2 days, well after firefighters had contacted pipeline personnel who assured them that there were no irregularities on the line. The fact is that most pipeline ruptures and leaks aren't detected by pipeline operators. They're detected by the public and emergency responders. Research that was mandated by Congress in 2011 shows that only 17% of releases are identified by control room operators. The NTSB has been studying the effects of delay in shutting down failed pipeline systems since 1970. We've issued recommendation after recommendation to address our concerns, and in 2011, Congress required their implementation, yet they remain unaddressed. With respect to additional safety needs, briefly, PHMSA regulations require pipeline operators to accurately identify high-consequence areas, determine threats to their pipelines, continually evaluate those lines using appropriate inspection methods, and repair any defects identified. This is known as integrity management. We've investigated 3 accidents which raise significant concerns with how operators are implementing these programs. As a result, the NTSB has issued 28 recommendations to improve integrity management, 10 of which remain on our most wanted list. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes for questions. I'll start out with Administrator Elliott. 8 years have now lapsed, as I said, since Congress passed the 2011 Pipeline Safety Bill, and PHMSA still has not implemented required regulations like the Hazardous Liquids Rule or Gas Transmission Rule. I think we could all agree that taking 8+ years to implement important safety regulations is a problem. I want to ask first, how is PHMSA reforming its regulatory process so that congressional mandates are implemented faster?
Chairman Lipinski, thank you for that question. I think we've done quite a bit since I last testified before this committee last June and heard quite clearly the dissatisfaction with the ability of PHMSA to move mandates, and we've done several things. First of all, we've really gone back and worked hard internally to make sure that we could complete developing the language for the rules that were still open. And I think the second thing that we have done is we've worked hard to streamline the rulemaking process at PHMSA. As you know, PHMSA is really two separate modes almost, one on pipeline and one on hazardous materials. And we found that there were some inefficiencies there that were not giving us the ability to staff our rulemaking process the way that would provide optimum results, and we've worked on that. So I think today we have a much better process internally for writing and pursuing not only mandates but all regulations that we're responsible for. I tell the team at PHMSA just about every day that we are responsible for making sure that the mandates that we have in front of us, that we can move as quickly and expeditiously as we can. I'm pleased that we've been able to complete our work on the pipeline safety rule. We've completed our work on the gas pipeline safety rule as well, and we're hoping that those will become published in the not-too-distant future.
What can Congress do to help PHMSA speed up the implementation of regulations?
Mr. Chairman, I think just your constant assistance in helping us understand the absolute urgency in moving these safety rules to conclusion.
I want to ask Ms. Hamady what you would recommend. Do you have any comments on what PHMSA has done and what you would recommend that PHMSA or Congress do? Speed up the regulations.
Well, there's a lot that goes into rulemaking, and I've had a lot of great conversations with the administrator and with PHMSA staff over the past several months and years, and it is frustrating. Part of the problem is there's no transparency in the rulemaking process. So we do have letters that go back and forth and communications between, and meetings as well, between NTSB and PHMSA, and a lot of the time the response is, well, we're going to work on these recommendations in rulemaking, but we actually don't know where the rulemaking is. Is it in PHMSA? Is it in the Secretary's office? Is it at OMB? So that's part of the problem, that we don't know where the holdup is. But, from our standpoint, a lot of the NTSB recommendations that were included in the 2011 and 2016 acts are not new recommendations. We've issued them for a number of years, and there was no action. Fortunately, you took action, and it is frustrating that now we don't have final rulemakings. And what concerns me most is having to go to an accident scene and meet with a loved one who's lost a family member and have to explain to them, what has happened, what we know about the accident and what the NTSB's process is, while our investigators know full well that something could have prevented that accident had it been implemented.
Thank you. I want to ask Mr. Elliott, do you intend to implement all of NTSB's safety recommendations?
Mr. Chairman, we have currently 20 open NTSB recommendations. 10 of those are linked to rulemakings that we're working through, and has been alluded to earlier, 3 of those are open and unacceptable. I would reiterate Member Hamandy's comments. I think we have a very strong working relationship with NTSB. Our staffs work regularly to help work through those recommendations and to find resolutions as quickly as possible. At least at my time at PHMSA, I think we have made some significant strides, not only in working more closely with the National Transportation Safety Board, but in bringing some of those recommendations to successful conclusions.
Ms. Hamidi, did you want to add anything else before we close?
We have 24, I would just clarify that we have 24 open safety recommendations. And one thing that a lot of people do not know is that when we issue a safety recommendation, there may be another way that PHMSA or the industry would like to address it and believe that they could address the safety issue identified, and they can propose an alternative. There have been recommendations that we've issued to PHMSA where they did provide an acceptable alternative, and we were able to close that recommendation. So we are eager to work with them. They sent us a letter yesterday to clarify where they were on the various recommendations, and we look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you. My time has expired. I want to recognize Ranking Member Crawford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question for Administrator Elliott. How can the rulemaking process be improved to ensure that safety regulations are keeping up with technological advances?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I think that one of the criticisms that PHMSA often gets is the inability for our rulemaking process to stay current with trends in innovation and technology, especially those where there's emerging safety technology. We work hard to try and ensure through our special permitting process that we can bring a lot of this new exploratory safety technology so that can be tested and we can see whether or not it can actually be included into the process within the regulations. I do think there are probably some additional ways that we can look to include emerging technology, especially safety technology and innovation, and we continue to explore those ways to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Ms. Hamidi, I want to ask a question about two of the members that presented testimony earlier today. What's the status of the 4 urgent NTSB recommendations issued to NiSource in the wake of the Merrimack Valley incident?
We issued for NiSource or for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I'm sorry.
NiSource.
For NiSource, they're continuing to implement our urgent recommendations, and we have communications from the company updating us on the status.
Okay. When the NTSB develops safety recommendations, is there consideration for who might ultimately bear the cost to implement that recommendation?
We do not consider cost. The NTSB's mission is safety. The regulator's role is to consider cost-benefit analysis when they're issuing regulations. But when it comes to safety, when it comes to the NTSB, our mission is safety and preventing future tragedies and saving lives.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Yield back.
And I recognize Chairman Fazio for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Specifically, where are we on the leak detection rule, Mr. Administrator?
Chairman DeFazio, thank you for that question. I've made comment on our progress on the liquid and gas rule and the leak detection and automatic valve rule. We've completed our work with that, and it is currently undergoing internal review at DOT. We think we have adequately prepared the notice of proposed rulemaking, and we hope that we can publish that notice of proposed rulemaking in the near future. We recognize the importance of that rule. I think we realize that while the liquid safety rule and the gas safety rule accommodate some of the concerns, that it really is the leak detection and the valve rule is the one that we really need to pursue now. So again, we've done our work on it and need to get the notice of proposed rulemaking out so we can then pursue that to final rule.
So you have written a NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and submitted it to DOT to whom?
Well, it goes through, quite an iteration within DOT. There are a number of departments within the DOT that review all of our rulemaking, and that's the process that it's going through now.
But I thought the theory when Congress created PHMSA, which used to be in DOT proper within the Secretary's office, that the idea was that you would have specific jurisdiction and a very particular body of knowledge. Who at DOT is more qualified than people at PHMSA to determine your NPRM?
Well, I would, Mr. Chairman, agree that there's a great amount of skill and talent at PHMSA when it comes to the pipeline rulemaking, but the process affords for others within the department to look at that rulemaking from their lenses and their points of views to make sure that it conforms with their interests.
Their interests. What are their interests? Are their interests in moving forward quickly with this critical rule, or are their interests in delaying the rules so that expenses won't be put upon the industry and more people might die? What are their interests?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, I think their interests are the same as mine, and that's safety. And I don't think there is any significant delay in moving this particular bill forward. I think it's just going through its normal review process.
Well, it just, quite a number of years in the making. It's a proposed rulemaking, which means it's still got to go out for public comment. Maybe the people at DOT could comment after you, maybe, it seems like an extra step here to me. The experts, those with the expertise, write the notice of proposed rulemaking. Then people who don't have the expertise are reviewing that rule. And how long has it been there?
Well, I mean, it has been with PHMSA for many years.
No, how long has it been over at DOT? How long since you completed it?
It's probably been within the last 90 days.
Okay. When might we expect it out of there? Do they work under timelines, or do they just things disappear over there and they come back when they come back?
Mr. Chairman, I can't answer that question specifically, but I can assure you that I have regular dialogue with the staff at the department on the importance of moving these mandates, and we'll continue to pursue that.
Okay, one other question. What is the current value of a human life?
You can't put a value on human life.
Well, I remember years ago having testimony when I was trying to get overwing exit seats removed, and the regulator actually had a very specific number that they put on the value of a human life to determine cost-benefit analysis. And I'm just curious, do you have such a rule as you do cost-benefit analysis?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we're required to do the cost-benefit analysis. But again, going back to your original question, you can't put a cost value on someone's life. And at PHMSA, each and every day, we focus on ensuring the safety of energy products that move in the U.S. pipeline network. We don't focus on anything else but trying to make the nation's pipeline system as safe as humanly possible.
But at some point, you do apply some sort of analysis. So you say, well, gee, this 30-inch pipeline, in order to put in leak detection, that's going to cost this much. And I mean, you must. What's the benefit side? How do you calculate the benefit?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, I mean, all the rules go through a cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, but I'm just curious. What is the benefit? Do we look at past like explosions like San Bruno and how much that cost, and then therefore that might be the leak detection benefit, or how do we calculate that?
Well, I'm not sure of the specifics of the calculation, and I'm pleased to work with you to provide more detailed information on that.
Yeah. Ms. Normandy, Mr. Chairman, if you just indulge, do you have any idea how that's done, given your past work on the committee and expertise?
The last time I looked, and I agree with the administrator, you can't put a value on life, but the DOT uses $9 million per life, is the last time I looked at the figures that they utilized. On the benefit side, I do believe they look at the accidents that occurred, and they put a savings value on that. I'm not sure how they develop it.
Okay. All right. I would like a little more information, Mr. Administrator. That would be useful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair will now recognize Mr. Boss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elliott, in terms of the pipeline security, a lot of attention has been focused on potential large-scale terrorist attacks on pipeline infrastructure. However, we also have noticed an uptick in small-scale attacks, predominantly intended to disrupt, but not to totally destroy critical infrastructure. You know, this includes pipelines, utility transmission lines, fiber optic cable, and just to name a few. But in your opinion, are current laws sufficient to deter actions that may disrupt pipeline operations? And then a follow-up to that, what are some of the potential safety issues of seemingly minor acts that we see when vandalism occurs?
Congressman, thank you for that question. PHMSA is primarily, as you know, a safety organization, but it's almost impossible in this day and age to separate safety from security. A safe operation is a secure operation, and conversely, a secure pipeline system is one that's safe. We work very closely with the primary pipeline security organization, the Transportation Security Administration, as well, more so on cyber-related issues with the Department of Energy. I do think that the coordination that we have with those primary security agencies is good. We help provide some technical experience to them about the nation's pipeline system, and they in turn help us better understand the current threats both to physical and cyber security. I do believe that there is a concern, especially with what our inspectors see on a day-to-day basis, of the potential impacts of attempts of vandalism of pipeline systems. There was one a few months ago, fortunately unsuccessful. And I do know that our inspectors on their regular inspection opportunities, they talk regularly to the pipeline operators about the steps that they have in place to help mitigate any security concerns.
So then, if someone commits one of these acts, I mean, I know if it's a terrorist act and there's a lot of damage and everything like that, but what do we do, and what kind of charges do we get to put on people to discourage it from happening in the future? Because I think sometimes there's certain groups and organizations that would prefer to do these things just to bring attention, even though we're trying to be as safe as possible. They know if they mess it up that we'll have problems as well.
Well, instances such as that, the operators will normally provide that data to local law enforcement authorities and even the FBI. And recently, we've had inquiries with regards to whether or not we believe that the penalties that exist for not so much kind of the terrorist types of attacks, but more the negative impacts to the pipeline system from demonstrators should be made more severe, and we've provided opinion on that.
Okay, thank you. So what challenges does the PHMSA is it facing in collecting data to assess and safety with the safety improvements and rulemaking?
Congressman, I think actually that the information that and the data that we collect from operators to help us improve safety is adequate. I think the information that we get through the collection of information through their integrity management systems, I think the information that we receive through work that they do with some of their sophisticated inline inspection helps us to formulate several things. It helps us to formulate the need for additional clarifications or rulemakings, but I think it also helps us better inform our inspectors, and it also informs us to focus on areas of greatest concern when we go out and inspect the regulated pipeline entity.
So just one more question, because the concern I have. So when it takes this long to go through the rulemaking process, with technology changing as fast as it does, how in the world will we be able to keep up with modifying our rules and changing the rules to keep up with the technology that actually makes it safer?
Right. Congressman, that's a valid concern, and it's one that we hear quite often from industry, because as we all know, the pace at which technology is improving is at a pretty rapid pace, and some of the safety technology and innovation is actually quite impressive. Today, our current vehicle for allowing that technology to come into play, typically not as part of a regulation, is through some special permit processes that we have. At PHMSA, we're working hard to make sure that we minimize that amount of time, but we're also looking at the possibility of introducing some types of pilot projects that will also allow some of this new safety technology to come into play more quickly. The concern that we have is that at PHMSA, we need to be absolutely sure that the technology works and will provide this kind of step change in safety. And in order to do that, we need to see it in actual application for a fair amount of time. But we're looking at ways to see how we can expedite that so that we can get the information we need then to allow it in general use.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Gregg for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On August 2nd, 2017, a building at the Minnehaha Academy in Minneapolis, Minnesota was destroyed by a natural gas explosion. As a result, 2 Minnesotans were killed and 9 were injured. Unfortunately, we still don't have much information about this event. Ms. Hamady, I understand the NTSB's investigation is ongoing, but can you provide any information about the board's processes and when we may be able to learn more from about this fatal incident?
Thank you for the question. We are in the process of preparing our brief, which is our final report, and that should be out by the end of this fiscal year. Shortly before that, we will open the public docket to provide some information about the investigation that we've obtained that then becomes publicly available. At that time, I'm happy to come in and brief you and your staff to talk about what that information is. I did talk with our Office of Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials to see what types of issues the investigators are looking at. And 4 groups were formed as part of the investigation to look at pipeline operations, human performance, survival factors, and the emergency response to the pipeline accident. In addition to that, materials looking at testing of the pipeline, and investigators are also looking at subcontractor oversight and worker qualifications. As our process moves forward, we're happy to come in and brief you.
Thank you so much. Just following up on that, the NTSB has long recommended that the Department of Transportation, PHMSA, and PHMSA's predecessor examine the need for leak detection on pipelines and issue a regulation on this topic. Can you talk a little bit more about why this is important?
Leak detection is about response time. If you have a leak that you don't discover for a substantial amount of time, you're going to end up with more damage, lives lost, people injured, and communities severely affected. If I look at some of the most recent incidents where we have investigated, you have PG&E, this latest one in San Francisco that I was at 2 hours to shut down the pipeline, and 95 minutes, 2 hours and 45 minutes at a previous one, and 9 hours before that. In the one we conducted in Centerville, the pipeline operator didn't detect a leak for 2 full days and kept telling the emergency responders there wasn't a problem on the pipeline. We need to detect leaks not only so that the operator can immediately respond, but that so emergency responders can respond. And it's not just, PHMSA does have performance standards that they issue in their regulations. It's not just that These operators need to use leak detection systems, and it's not just one, it may be many. But they also have to have performance standards. PHMSA has to issue performance standards for leak detection. For example, Alaska requires that all crude oil pipelines be equipped with a leak detection system capable of promptly detecting a leak of no more than 1% of daily throughput. That's a performance standard that doesn't exist in PHMSA regulations right now. And it's beyond just the leak detection systems themselves and the performance standards. You have to have proper training for personnel, good corporate policies, sort of a safety management system so you make sure everyone is properly trained and addresses the problem.
Just following up to that, Mr. Elliott, can you tell us what prevents you from having those performance standards in place?
Congressman, thank you for the question. You know, a number of the items that you made specific reference to on leak detection, again, are included in the mandates that we're working to complete, the liquid rule as well as the rupture detection and valve rule. We at PHMSA are working to complete those and hope to have those out as final rules in the very near future. And we think that will address many of the issues that you may make reference to.
Well, it can't come soon enough for families in my state.
I understand.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognize Mr. Spano for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony, Ms. Hamidi, Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott, I have a couple questions for you, if I may. Much of what we do in terms of making policy, much of what agencies do in terms of their rulemaking decisions involves kind of a balancing, you know, costs and benefits and interests and so forth. I understand you engage in such an analysis in terms of your rulemaking. Can you tell us about that process? Give us some understanding, some detail to help us appreciate exactly what are the factors you look at and how do you make a determination in terms of those costs and benefits?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. All the rulemakings that we deal with will go through a cost-benefit of regulatory impact analysis, looking at a lot of different factors, basically the past history of incidents and impacts, matching that against the projected cost of what the rule, the implementation of the rule. I think it's important to identify that that's only one component of our rulemaking process. I mean, the cost-benefit analysis is something that we're required to do. But I really do think we focus more on the overall safety benefits that the rules will bring to the regulated community as well as the public. We understand that you know, most of the mandates that we deal with have costs associated with them, and we recognize that that cost is something that needs to be incurred so that we can bring these safety regulations into play.
Thank you so much. Of the various rulemakings currently in progress, how many NTSB recommendations will be addressed?
Well, as Member Hamidi corrected me, we have 24 open NTSB recommendations, and of the 24, 10 of those recommendations will be addressed in rulemakings that we're currently working on.
10 of the 24. Thank you. Then one last question for you. What are the current policies in place at PHMSA to address rupture detection in pipelines?
So, again, rupture detection is a topic that's been brought up several times here today, Congressman, and it's one that's very important to us. And I want to underscore what Member Hamidi said, because rupture detection and leak detection really basically go to the ability to detect a problem and resolve it before it turns into something serious. But our rupture detection and automatic valve rule has quite honestly languished behind two rules that we put ahead of it, the liquid safety rule and the gas rule. And as been mentioned before, we've finished our work on the notice of proposed rulemaking. We do intend to get that out to the public for comment very quickly, and then we hope to expedite that to a final rule.
So just to clarify, are there any policies in place with regard to rupture protection currently?
Well, certainly within our integrity management requirements and existing federal rules, there are some that deal with rupture detection programs, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognize Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses as well. Mr. Chairman, thank you, Chairman DeFazio as well, Chairman Graves and Chairman Crawford. Pipeline safety is an incredibly important hearing, and I want to associate myself with the remarks of Ms. Trahan and Mr. Moulton, my colleagues from Massachusetts, and I certainly support their recommendations that we require licensed technicians and engineers on site, and we have adequate supervisory staffing at all times, no waivers, no exceptions. My own situation in my district, I have a couple of situations. One in West Roxbury, Massachusetts. It's part of the city of Boston. We have a transfer from a low-pressure line, natural gas line, to a high pressure. I think it was 5 to 10 PSI before, now it's 50. This is a thickly settled residential neighborhood. This particular gas pipeline, constructed by Spectra Energy, goes through a gravel quarry that is adjacent to this residential neighborhood, so they're side by side. And there's active blasting. There's active blasting going on in the quarry, next to the people's homes, kids, schools, very densely settled residential neighborhood. We tried mightily, the mayor, myself, elected officials, to get Spectra to move that pipeline out of the blasting zone and onto a major thoroughfare where it would not be proximate to residential homes. We went into court several times. The whole legal process here of trying to raise local safety concerns in the context of the Natural Gas Act of 1938, that system is impervious to local concerns. We have been in the court, and we lose every time, lack of standing. We can't get into that process. The second situation I have is Weymouth, Massachusetts, another heavily settled, thickly settled, densely settled residential area. And I've got a compressor station that they want to build there. It's already an area that's heavily impacted by industrial use. There's a couple of tank farms, things like that, right on the coast, but the residential neighborhood is right there. So how do we raise the safety concerns in the context of the Natural Gas Act of 1938? Because I have lost so many times in court already, I can't even get into the process. We get bounced out all the time. And I'm afraid that what has happened in Merrimack Valley is going to happen in one of my neighborhoods, and we're going to have a massive loss of life because the area is much more concentrated with young children and residences. So, Mr. Elliott, if you want to take a crack at that, how do I protect my neighbors?
Well, Congressman, thank you very much for the question. And you know, with regards to the compressor station at Weymouth, you may recall that approximately a month or so ago, we had a conversation where you've asked for assistance on helping to set up a public meeting that will bring perhaps more points of view to bear. And as I responded to you, we're happy to work with you on that public meeting. That certainly is one way for us to help better understand the circumstances that are ongoing up there. You know, of the 2.7 million miles of pipeline that exist today in the United States, 80% of those are distribution pipeline systems such as you're talking about. I do think we have an extremely good working relationship with our state partners. We continue to work to strengthen that. We continue to work to strengthen their ability to provide adequate oversight to state distribution networks.
That's fair enough. I don't want to use all my time on this, but I'm not having the same experience with FERC, okay? And you know, that's a major problem because that's the adversarial relationship we have here in trying to impact this. Ms. Hamady, would you like to take a crack at that? In terms of how we might raise the safety concerns of local neighborhoods?
I think I would agree with the administrator. Public meetings are probably the best way you're going to be able to have.
We've had those, though, with FERC, and they just, you know, they just blow us off and do what they're going to do anyway. That's the problem here. So I appreciate the recommendation that we have more meetings, but I got to get some stuff done. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize Mr. Sauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Elliott, a couple questions. How often do pipelines generally need to be replaced?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I don't think there's a specific number of years that you can apply to that question. Operators, through a very rigorous integrity management system, are responsible for ensuring the usable life of their systems, and understand as well, I think it's probably fair to say that there's quite a bit of difference when you talk about the different types of pipelines. Is it liquid? Is it gas? Is it a transmission line? Or is it a distribution system line? And as we have been talking about for many years, many of the nation's distribution lines, those that typically are still of cast iron or bare steel, provide some of the greatest concerns. We're happy that there are 21 states today that have basically done away with any old cast iron distribution pipeline systems, but we're continuing to try and find new ways to incentivize the replacement of some of these aged distribution lines. We just introduced a bill that will allow for new plastic types of pipes that we hope will kind of accelerate the replacement of distribution pipelines. But again, going back to your basic question, it really is up to the individual operator to identify and maintain the absolute safety of their pipeline system. Now, having said that, we have for a long time acknowledged the importance of replacing aged pipeline, and we certainly underscore and support those operators that have replacement plans.
And that leads to my next question. And do you think that pipelines need to be replaced once they start to corrode?
Again, I think there are a number of factors there, Congressman. I think as long as problems such as corrosion are detected early in the process and that an operator can go and resolve that corrosion and do sufficient testing to ensure that the pipeline is not compromised, I think that pipeline can stay in service. I might also add that I think this is an area where we're seeing some of the advancements in technology, especially in inline inspection, that do a much better job of identifying early corrosion before it turns into a problem.
And I'll say this, Enbridge Line 3 runs through my district. The pipeline runs from Canada through my district in northern Minnesota to Superior, Wisconsin. Enbridge is currently moving forward with a replacement plan that will make Line 3 even safer than it is right now. And I'm going to go over some safety measures that Enbridge takes on its current pipelines and its future replacement. Do you think anti-corrosion coatings are important for safety?
Yes, I do.
Do you think pressure testing is important for safety?
I think depending on the nature of the pipeline and how it's used as part of an integrity management system, it can be a useful tool, yes.
And do you think pipeline monitoring is important for safety?
Monitoring can take a number of different terms, but I think, again, as part of a company's integrity management system, they need to make sure that they are monitoring the absolute health of that pipeline in such a way that they understand the safety of the pipeline at all times.
And then do you think automatic shutoff valves are important for safety?
I do believe that automatic shutoff valves are important, and I would hope that as soon as we can continue to move through with some of these mandates that will afford appropriate application of automatic shutoff valves, that we will see an even safer pipeline system in this country.
Thank you. And I agree with the important safety measures and steps that Enbridge has been taking to make sure their pipeline remains safe. And I also agree with you that pipelines need to be replaced from time to time. You know, we can't get wrapped up in political fights whether they need to be replaced or not. And, this project's approval process with Enbridge Replacement Line 3 has been going on since 2014. They have all the necessary permits from North Dakota, and they have the unanimous approval from Minnesota's Public Utilities Commission. The only thing holding the project up is state-level politics. And in the name of safety, I support this project and other important pipeline projects like this that are centered around safety. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The chair will now recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Series.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and thank you for being here today. You know, I said it at a number of these hearings regarding pipeline safety. And directors come and directors go, and they always say the same thing. We have to insist on higher level of safety. We must complete outstanding congressional mandates. Yeah, from 1999 to 2018, nearly twofold increase in incidents, which demonstrates to me that there's some sort of a gap there, something's missing. How can we be insisting on all these safety factors and we still have increases and increases? What is the gap? What are we not doing? And I'm very concerned because I come from an area in New Jersey, I think there's a pipe underneath every brick. I mean, it's very congested. There are a lot of old pipes. I don't even think people know where some of these pipes go. And we're constantly having incidents where people keep breaking into the pipes and, and there's an incident. So, Director, how do we get twofold increase?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question, and I absolutely appreciate your concern. And having spent many years working up in northern New Jersey, I understand your perspective with regards to pipeline. First of all, you have my assurance that, at least in my time as the administrator at PHMSA, that I will do everything possible to make sure that the men and women at PHMSA work hard every day to improve pipeline safety. There's much more we can do, and every day we discover new opportunities for safety that we really work to try and pursue. I do believe that through a series of regulations, through inspections and enforcement, and continued use of technology and innovation to help drive safer pipelines, that we can close the gap that you talk about.
Are you insisting, or are you making an effort, or somebody is making an effort to identify where these pipes are? Because I think that there are a lot of pipes around that have been around a long time, and I don't even know if people know exactly where they are. And the other problem that we had in the Edison issue that we had in 1994, the firemen would not go into the fire because they didn't know what was there. So what have we done to make sure that the safety of the firemen is guaranteed when they show up at these incidents? Can you?
Yes, Congressman, that is a big problem. Right now, PHMSA has a national pipeline mapping system, and we have some recommendations for improving the national pipeline mapping system, including that they have to provide where high consequence areas are. These are high population areas and other areas, so emergency responders know where they are. There's also a problem on where it the identification, the accurate location of that pipeline. Right now in the pipeline mapping system, it's give or take 500 feet. If you're a responder, that's a big deal. And so what responders need, and you're going to hear from the fire chief later today, is they need to know exactly where the pipeline is. They need to know what's in it. They need to know who the operator is. They need to have a relationship with that operator. It's like me. I tell operators all the time, if the first time you meet me is on the scene of an accident, it's not going to be a good day. Firefighters need to work with operators, and operators need to work with firefighters so they can adequately plan for a potential incident. They need to know not just what's in the pipeline, but what the worst case scenario discharge is going to be if there's an incident. They need proper training, they need equipment, and in order to get training, fire departments need to have funding to backfill that position so that people can go get that training.
We have so many communities in New Jersey We have 561 communities, I think. And I think every community should know exactly what goes through their community so they can fight it if there's an incident. And I don't know if that is happening.
That is not a requirement.
What's that a requirement?
That communities are not informed. I mean, there is some pipeline education and awareness program that is required under PHMSA regulations, and I'm sure the administrator can talk about that. And so some information does go out to the community about what's operating, but the specific information, like how much and what exactly, people won't know that in real time. But
Yeah, and Congressman, if I may, and again, I want to underscore Member Hamidi's concerns. I mean, prior to coming to PHMSA, my 40 years in the railroad had a long history in your state of New Jersey of working with emergency responders to provide real-time information about the commodities that are moving through those 500-plus communities in northern New Jersey where railroads operate. And I think the same is true of what we need to do in the nation's pipeline community. I think it's a topic that we need to address more fully, but certainly anything that we can do to help ensure the safety of America's emergency responders with regards to response to pipeline or other surface hazardous material type incidents, we need to be working on collaboratively to do that.
My time is up. Thank you very much.
Chair now recognizes for 5 minutes, Mr. Pence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Elliott and Ms. Homendy. Let me start out by saying that protecting life is priceless. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, kind of going off what Congressman Stauber was asking about the monitoring and things like that. Leak detection in pipelines has been around for a long time, both for economic and safety reasons. Has anything occurred in the systems, in specifically the monitoring system, that warrants faster upgrades? Is it age, material, as you mentioned, the iron pipes, material deterioration or ground shifts, as was mentioned earlier?
Well, Congressman, I at least from the perspective that I have, I think there's been some significant improvement in overall leak detection. We know historically that small leak incidents will continue to be, until technology avails itself, will always be something that would be more difficult to detect. But I think what I have seen, at least in my time at PHMSA, in understanding more some of the control room technology, is kind of this increase in technology that allows for quick and prompt identification of more significant releases that will have more of a negative impact to the environment and to human life, and that's something that our inspectors review regularly. I think there's always more that can be done to improve leak detection capabilities, especially for those smaller leaks. And I think that it's important for us to pursue some of the mandates that Congress have given us in order to put some of those measures into place.
I would just add, more important than leak detection, because certainly you want to detect a leak when it occurs, even the small leaks. And there are different technologies, and it's not just using one technology, it's using many technologies and choosing the right one. But it's how you inspect your pipeline to ensure that there isn't a leak. And there are different ways of inspecting pipelines. Pipeline operators use inline inspection technologies like sensing technologies, using smart pigs. They use pressure testing like hydrostatic testing. Direct assessment is really where they get in and they excavate and look at a pipeline. And they use other technologies like fiber optics. The one recommendation that the NTSB has is for PHMSA to implement is prohibiting the use of direct assessment as the sole method of inspection. Because when you're excavating a pipeline and you're conducting direct assessment, you've already sensed there's a problem in that line, and you're excavating for that specific problem that you may have identified to try to look at it and maybe remediate it. But when you're using maybe inline inspection or hydrostatic testing, which is a much more comprehensive way of testing, you're not just finding things that you're looking for, you're finding things that you're not looking for and you didn't expect to find. And that's where you can take proactive measures to prevent a leak before it even occurs.
Thank you. One other question. How will the recent MOU between PHMSA and FERC improve pipeline and faculty facility safety while encouraging our energy security?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Understandably, there's been an increase in the number of applications for LNG facilities, especially as we work to become more of an exporter of this energy product. PHMSA last October completed a memorandum of understanding with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to assist in their review of these applications. And the memorandum of understanding basically allows PHMSA to apply its safety review of all of these LNG applications, and then once a determination is made, send that determination over to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so that they can complete their application and permitting process. And we do believe, at least in our discussions with our colleagues at FERC, that this will significantly reduce the amount of time that it will take to approve an application for LNG facilities. And I think rightfully so, it gives PHMSA the ability to oversee a process that they're very good at with some of our very talented LNG experts, and that's the safety of these sites.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time.
Chair will now recognize Mr. Malinowski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This issue really hits home in my district, in part in New Jersey, because we have a new natural gas pipeline that has been proposed to be built, the Penn East pipeline, which is supposed to begin in Pennsylvania, run through a rural part of my congressional district, chiefly through Hunterdon County, New Jersey. It's a pipeline that will run through people's front yards and backyards, through farmland. I have never seen an issue in my short time in politics that is more unifying to members of my community. They're all against it for a whole range of reasons, concerned about impact on the environment, a desire not to give up farmland and property in which they've invested years of their lives. But setting all of those issues aside, there's also the question of safety. I have stood on people's front porches who've shown me pipeline route that will be running within feet of their homes. And given all of the accidents that have happened around the country, they are naturally concerned. I know we've covered some of this, but I just want to ask you, Ms. Homendy, given all of the recommendations that the safety recommendations that have not yet been fully implemented, what would you say if you were standing with me on the front porch of one of my constituents who's facing the potential of a pipeline running through their front yard or backyard? What would you say are the essential steps that would have to be taken by a company building a new pipeline so that you could join me in telling them that, setting aside all those other concerns, at the very least, their families will be safe? What would be your specific checklist?
Well, the checklist would obviously be that they have to comply with the existing standards, but then we have a number of other ones that we've recommended: automatic shutoff valves, proper leak detection, proper inspection, repair of pipelines, and frankly, strengthening the integrity management program. We have identified some significant issues with some recent pipeline accidents where pipeline operators' integrity management program is not as sufficient as it should be. And integrity management is really how they conduct inspection, how they determine where their high consequence areas are, how they determine their threats and the risks to the pipeline. If they just look at what's happened over the last couple years and not really much broadly, they may determine that it's a different threat. But I'm going to be honest with you. At the beginning of my testimony, I said pipelines are one of the safest modes of transportation, but you can't guarantee there will never be an accident. And when an accident occurs, it can be tragic. The best we can do is continue to advocate for safer and safer systems. And while the NTSB does not have a role in the planning or the permitting of a new pipeline, we do urge adoption of our existing and future safety recommendations to ensure pipeline safety.
Thank you. And in the case of a new pipeline, and again, I understand that's not formally your role, but would your office be willing to work with ours to look at plans for a new pipeline and advise us as to whether they live up to the highest standards that you're recommending?
We are always willing to work with your office and provide information where we are able. I'm happy to meet with you and meet with your staff as well.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Chair, and I'll recognize Mr. Davis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with Mr. Elliott. Back in my district, I recently heard from a constituent regarding a shallow pipe buried under his farmland. Central Illinois has some of the best farmland in the country, so it's no surprise my constituent was concerned with his inability to farm the land above and surrounding the pipe. My question for you is, are there any gaps in current legislation regarding shallow pipes that we can address in the upcoming reauthorization? And additionally, can we do anything to better the process by which landowners and pipe owners settle such disputes?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I'll answer the second part of your question first. And I do think one of the most important aspects of pipeline construction is the interaction that goes on between the landowner and the pipeline company to ensure that what is being installed is, first of all, being installed in a very safe fashion and allows certain appropriate uses of that land once that the installation has been made. I think that's something that can always be addressed further with the pipeline operating companies. With regards to your first question, I'm not specifically aware of the specifics of the depth of pipeline, but with regards to your comment about is that something that might be addressed in reauthorization, I'm happy to work with your office on thoughts and ideas on that.
Well, great. Thank you very much for your time. And hello, Ms. Hamady. How are you?
Hello, sir. It's good to see you.
You know, it's great to have you on that side of the table. And
it's very different.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I hope you enjoy your new job. I didn't know you'd have to come back so soon and face Chairman DeFazio once again.
Well, if there was going to be a hearing that I was going to testify at, this would have been the one. Thank you so much.
I made sure I did not leave before I got a chance to question you today.
Oh, perfect. I hope it's the easy question.
Well, of course. Well, you know, as a former staffer myself, I can appreciate you going to that side and coming to face us once again. And we have a history together. It's great to have worked with you in your last capacity. And I know it's not easy working with Chairman DeFazio and Chairman Lipinski, but they're good people. So I wanted to ask you, my clock says something.
No comment.
Mr. Chairman. You know, I didn't have a specific question for you, so I texted a good friend of mine to get a question. And that was our former colleague, Mr. Capuano. And I know you're surprised, but Mr. Capuano got back to me. So the question that he wanted me to ask you is, how much do you miss working with him?
I mostly miss the outfits he wore, specifically the short sleeve shirts under the nice jackets. No, I mean he was
Lipinski
amazing.
has one on today.
He was fantastic to work with, and I very much miss him and his accent.
Well, yes, you both have accents. Yes, you do. He wanted me to wish you well and congratulate you. And I texted my wife, Shannon, who you know, and she wanted to offer her congratulations too. And we're very proud of you and look forward to working with you, Jen. Thanks for putting up with my first questions. Next time you're here, I'm going to have some really detailed questions for you.
I'm excited because I'm testifying next Tuesday in front of your subcommittee, so I'll anticipate those.
I can't wait. Hey, congratulations. We'll see you then. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Mr. Davis, I'm going to have to look into the rules if what the chair can do about kicking members off of a subcommittee. And I do have sleeves, so. I will now recognize Mr. Fletcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski. Thank you for holding this hearing, and to Ranking Member Crawford as well. Thank you to the witnesses for taking time to testify. This committee's talked a lot about what it means to build a modern infrastructure and what we need to do to have one for the next century. And many know that our nation's roads and bridges are in dire need of investment and updating. But we also know that infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges, and that pipelines make the modern world we live in possible. If you live in my district in Houston, you live near a pipeline. And that's true across the country. And pipelines are really unseen infrastructure, but they stretch from coast to coast, and especially to the Gulf Coast, where I live. There are 2.6 million miles of paved roads in the United States, and there are more than 2.5 million miles of pipeline in the United States. And people, when I talk to them, are surprised to hear that, but it's true. It's just as important, and I think that the emphasis on addressing our pipeline needs in this hearing and on this committee is incredibly important. Thanks to the recent energy renaissance in shale extraction, our domestic outlook has shifted dramatically. And as we just heard a little bit about the MOU, facilities originally designed to import liquefied natural gas are now massive export facilities. And U.S. producers are expected to dominate the market. These radical changes have occurred throughout the industry, but the rules and regulations have not kept pace, and we need them to. I look forward to hearing both from administration officials today and to industry and safety advocates on the opportunity for improvements to our current system. And my questions for this portion of the hearing are really directed to Administrator Elliott. We often hear about how PHMSA needs more pipeline inspectors on staff, but I'm curious about the staffing needs for technical and rulemaking staff. So my first question is, has a shortage in staffing among technical staff and those involved in the rulemaking process contributed to PHMSA's slowness in issuing the rules prescribed by congressional mandate that date back to 2011?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. When I first became administrator in October of 2017, you're correct, we were facing a pretty significant staffing issue. I'm pleased to say that we've made some significant headway in staffing of our technical staff, not only the technical staff, both on the pipeline and hazmat side, and sometimes when we talk about PHMSA, we forget about the surface hazmat side, that we've got some highly capable people that deal with reactive materials and explosives and radioactive components and pressure vessels, so there's a great amount of technology on that side of the equation as well. But we've made some significant strides in helping to close the gap of bringing on especially on the pipeline side, good quality technical folks. As you know, we're in competition, especially in your district, of trying to bring on good quality engineers that we can turn into some of the best pipeline inspectors in this country. But I think we, through some direct hiring capabilities we have, through broadening our outreach to a wider array of colleges and universities, I think we're closing that gap. And I will tell you that I do think that the talent that we're bringing on bring with them some great technical foundation. I think Perhaps what concerns me most is that we, like many businesses and many other federal agencies, we're seeing a significant amount of our highly skilled, experienced staff reaching that retirement eligibility age, and we're really working hard to try and do the best we can to create a transfer of knowledge of that information before it goes out the door. So on the technical side, I think we've identified not only how to maintain our staffing, but also to do as good a job as we can to make sure that we transfer that technical knowledge. On the rulemaking side, I'll tell you this, my impression that I think we have a highly skilled staff on the rulemaking side. We have made some changes in our rulemaking staff that makes it a little bit more nimble and agile to kind of allow us to put resources to both either the pipeline or the hazmat side of the rulemaking, depending where the surge is at the time. But I think between the technical staff, the subject matter experts that provide input into the rulemaking, I think the staff of economists that we have that do the analysis, and then I think the group of attorneys that also do that legal review that's required are all top shelf, and I'm really proud of the work that they do. I think one of the first things I saw at PHMSA was how could we make that rulemaking group be more efficient and effective. Again, we try to now work as quickly as we can in our rulemaking process to make sure that we complete our work, and then before we pass it off to others that have to review it as well.
I see that my time has expired, so thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. I apologize for I got so discombobulated by Mr. Davis there. I just said Mr. and I looked at the name and kept going, unfortunately, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
I will now recognize Mr. Allred for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I want to welcome you and look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can enhance safety on our nation's pipeline network. As a Texan, I represent Dallas. I'm proud to be serving on this subcommittee, as I understand the importance of the oil and gas industry to our state's economy. And the energy industry employs thousands of Texans, and across the state, we are doing a lot to power this country and also to make us an exporter now as well. And I also understand the great importance of ensuring the safe operation of pipelines and pipeline facilities. We've talked a lot about that today, of course. Last year, there were several troubling pipeline incidents in Texas, including one in Dallas, just outside of my district. Ms. Hamandi, I understand the NTSB is currently investigating a February 2018 natural gas explosion in Dallas, right outside my district, that killed a 12-year-old girl and injured 4 others. According to the NTSB's preliminary report, more than 300 residences were evacuated due to a number of gas pipeline leaks in that neighborhood. Can you walk me through what the investigation has found so far and provide a timeline for when the NTSB will issue a final report on the investigation?
Sure, and I just want to extend our deepest condolences to that family who sadly lost a 12-year-old, and the remaining 4 members were injured. As a mother of an 11-year-old, I can't imagine the pain and what they're experiencing. But as you mentioned, the accident occurred on February 23rd, 2018. Our preliminary report was issued on March 23rd. It is still under investigation. Odor reports and activity by Atmos in the neighborhood indicated that leaks were first detected almost 2 months prior to the explosion. Atmos was performing work on pipelines just prior to the incidents. While on scene, NTSB investigators identified 3 sections of pipe which failed a pressure test. One was behind the residence where the explosion occurred, and it had a circumferential crack in the pipe. Atmos has claimed in some recent articles that the rupture was due to heavy rain and soil composition. So the NTSB contracted with the Army Corps of Engineers to take soil samples and conduct geological testing. We did that in San Bruno as well to rule out seismic activity. The report on that from the Army Corps of Engineers is due on April 30th. We intend to open the public docket on this incident at the end of June and issue a report shortly thereafter. In general, we're looking at pipeline operations, the adequacy of Atmos's energy integrity management program, human performance, their safety management system if they had one, and the adequacy of emergency response.
Well, thank you. And my wife and I just had a baby as well, and I can't imagine being in your home and having that happen and losing a child like that. There's been a lot of talk today about PHMSA's unimplemented safety provisions, and I'm interested if there are any specific provisions that you think would have prevented or reduced the likelihood of this particular incident.
It's a great question. It's one that I can't answer yet because the investigation is still ongoing, but I can tell you that our staff at the NTSB, I've only been there 7.5 months, but I've worked with the NTSB for many, many years, which is why I wanted to go there. The staff is incredible, so I will tell you that if there is a recommendation that needs to be issued to ensure safety and address what occurred in Dallas, it will be issued.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate your comments. I yield back.
Chair will now recognize Mr. Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this timely hearing as well. Let's see, Mr. Elliott, my question has to do with what we're doing to protect critical safety gaps. And my issue is around water pipelines. I'm from New Jersey, and it seems like the committee is dominated by North Jerseyans. I'm from New Jersey as well, and from the city of Newark, and we have a reservoir system up in the western part of the state, which is pretty interesting because most of the water is moved by gravity as opposed to pumping stations because of the proximity in the mountains. And so I'm just very concerned about the safety of those pipelines coming such a great distance. And I'm concerned about that because of my representation there in Newark. So, giving my district's reliance on, this infrastructure, sole pipeline, I want to make sure that it is safe and protected. So what are you doing around water infrastructure in terms of safety?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question. Having been a resident of New Jersey for 13 years, I know exactly the infrastructure that you're talking about. PHMSA does not have oversight over water pipeline systems, but certainly where multiple pipelines come into close proximity, there's always a concern for safety. But to perhaps address on the more broader question about what are we doing to enhance safety, I think from the point of view, at least from the state of New Jersey, several things I can talk to. First of all, with regards to PHMSA oversight of transmission lines in the state, we have an office in Trenton, and the inspection staff there is responsible for working with transmission pipeline operators in the state to inspect any new construction, but also to oversee maintenance and operations of their pipeline systems to ensure the safety and the integrity. Of course, in New Jersey, as I had mentioned earlier, 80% of the nation's pipeline is part of a distribution network that's, for all intent and purposes, overseen by state regulators. We do have a responsibility there, too, and while most state pipeline offices do a very good job of overseeing intrastate pipeline, we do have a responsibility to work with them to make sure that the work that they do helps comply with at least the minimum federal standards that we put into place. So it's kind of a tag team approach between what PHMSA can do with transmission lines and with the state oversight on some of the distribution networks. Our intent is to make sure that all operators, whether or not it's a distribution system or a transmission line, comply with the regulations and ensure the safety of their operations for the good people of New Jersey.
Okay, well, thank you, and apologize for trying to give you the responsibility of that area as well, so thank you, though.
Well, as long as it doesn't come with more mandates that I would get in trouble for. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Chair will now recognize Mr. Desaulnier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elliott, I wanted to ask you about changes to PHMSA after the 2010 San Bruno explosion in Northern California. I appreciate you coming into the office and meeting with me, given the number of hazardous materials site in my district in Northern California. But when this incident happened, the incident lasted for 95 minutes. NTSB came back and said that that was a contributing factor to the fact that 70 homes were lost and 8 people's lives were lost. It's a continuing concern. Certainly we have our own unique seismic issues we have to deal with in California. But I wanted you to give the committee an update as to implementation of the direction from Congress after that incident in terms of automatic valves and remote control shutoffs.
Well, Congressman, thank you for your time the other day, and I was quite interested to learn more about the district and some of the challenges you faced there. You know, it was September of 2010 when San Bruno occurred, and I believe there were 8 fatalities, and terrible tragedies like that should not occur under any circumstances. Earlier today, I spoke of, based on questions that I heard from members of the subcommittee about progress in our rupture detection and automatic valve rule, which quite frankly has languished behind several of the other pipeline rules that we had been working on, one on pipeline liquid safety and one on gas safety. A lot of what you're talking about from the incident at San Bruno, we hope to resolve with the rupture detection and automatic valve rule that's in the notice of proposed rulemaking stage. We hope to have that out for public comment very shortly, and then once we can see the responses back from that, we hope to move that to a final rule. We know we've got some work to do there. We know that the specter of the incident in San Bruno is still something that we talk about quite often at PHMSA, and our need to do more to make sure that we never have a repeat of an incident like that.
I appreciate that. And coming from a district that has the largest geographic and population density of hazardous material sites, as I explained to you, with 4 refineries in an urbanized area, it's not unlike Philadelphia or these urbanized areas where generally we do a very good job, but all it takes is that one incident, and certainly for the people affected, you can't explain our inability to provide these kind of remedies. For NTSB, have there been other incidents, Ms. Somandini? I'm sorry I wasn't here for Mr. Davis's dialogue, and I'll be happy to text Mr. Capuano if you'd like. But could you give us any information? Have there been other incidences where these type of remote control valves or automatic shutoffs would have helped in incidents since the San Bruno one?
There have been many incidents where they would have. I mean, we have in general an issue with shutting down, with pipelines being shut down promptly once an incident occurs, and actually the operator knowing about the problem. With PG&E, we had an incident not too long ago where, you know, it was 2 hours to shut down the pipeline, and this one it was 95 minutes, and it did we did find that it severely hindered emergency response operations because of the lack of shutoff valves and also lack of appropriate training for pipeline personnel who had gone and didn't know how to deal with the manual valves. But in other instances, you have a prior PG&E incidents where it took them 2 hours and 45 minutes to shut it down, or 9 hours, or You had a Centerville, Virginia incident, which was 2 hours. So, and then certainly in the Enbridge pipeline incident in Marshall, Michigan, that was 17 hours. So I think the history on pipeline accidents is we need to be able to detect a leak properly and then to shut down the pipeline. And, you know, automatic and remote shut-off valves sort of take the human out of the equation. I will say the recent Merrimack Valley incident where you had manual valves, and while Columbia Gas was able to shut down the regulator station within 3 hours, they were not able to turn off the gas for 3 hours. So that also contributes to significant issues.
It'd be helpful for me, and I assume the committee, any kind of updates you could provide on a timeline, because it's certainly urgent for those of us who live in these areas with urban areas and the high concentration of pipelines. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Sure.
The chair will now recognize the vice chair of the full committee, Mr. Carbajal, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Elliott, thank you for coming before our committee to discuss pipeline safety. This is a particularly important issue for my constituents on the Central Coast of California. From the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill to the 2015 Plains All-American Pipeline oil spill at Refugio Beach, we have seen the damage oil spills inflict on our communities and local economies. In 2011, the House worked in a bipartisan way to pass the Pipeline Safety Act. This law, which passed the House unanimously, directed PHMSA to update and strengthen key pipeline safety standards. Today, 8 years after the enactment of the Pipeline Safety Act of 2011, rulemakings related to leak detection and emergency shutoff valves are still not finalized. While it is my understanding that a notice of proposed rulemaking is finally on the way later this summer, this was after an 8-year delay and after much advocacy, clearly unacceptable. And I know your service just started in 2017, but you become the spokesperson to address these issues today. So let me ask you, why has this taken so long?
Well, Congressman, thank you for the question, and I share your concerns about the length of time that it's taken to move these rules through, and I appreciate your comment about my adoption of things that might have happened or didn't get done prior to my time coming on as administrator. I think there are several factors that came into play. With the determination after this subcommittee, when I testified before the subcommittee last June, I had to go back and make some decisions about what rules do we want to focus on first. And while I think we have an extremely capable rulemaking staff, it still has limited resources, and I honestly think they're working the best they can. But I went back and I focused on the rules with that team that I thought would have the greatest impact to safety the quickest. And the two that we really focused on dealt with surface hazmat transportation issues. One dealing with response to major rail incidents should they occur with petroleum crude oil, and the other with the safety of lithium-ion batteries, removing cargo-type lithium-ion batteries from passenger commercial airlines. Once that work was done, then we really did turn our attention back to these important pipeline mandates. And kind of the order that they came in was the safety of liquid pipeline rule, which we've completed our work, and it's now at OMB, and we're hoping that we have a quick turnaround there. And then the second, and perhaps the one that's more responsive to you, was the gas rule, which had been identified as the mega rule. And ultimately what we did to help streamline that was to break it into 3 parts. And the most important part, the part that contains the mandates that were brought forward by Congress, are the ones that we've now completed our work on, and that's also going through internal review. We do know we have work to do on.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there because I have a few more questions. Have any of the administration's executive orders caused any further delays on the implementation of safety rules?
I do not believe so. You know, we focus on moving forward safety rules each and every day, and I think a good example of a non-mandate safety rule that we just recently published as a final rule is the plastic pipe rules. We were looking for ways within PHMSA to help us incentivize replacement of the aging distribution pipe network, and we thought this was one where new technology in plastic pipe construction would allow us to do that.
Thank you. And lastly, what are some of the ways that we can reform PHMSA, the PHMSA process, to ensure we do not have these lengthy delays in the future?
Well, Congressman, I mentioned earlier, I worked hard at PHMSA to make sure that our portion of the rulemaking process is as good as it can be, that when we have a rule that we're moving because it's one we've identified is necessary for improving pipeline or hazardous material safety, or it's a mandate from Congress, that we work as quickly as possible to complete our portion of that rulemaking. We've done that through several ways, kind of just building an additional sense of urgency in our rulemaking process. And the second part, as I had mentioned earlier, kind of creating a more streamlined internal pipeline and hazardous material rulemaking process that allows us basically to utilize existing staff to the fullest potential to make sure that we are moving those rules that have the greatest impact.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank Administrator Elliott and Member Hamady for their testimony today. There will be follow-up questions, I'm sure, from this hearing, and we'll be calling on you further as we move forward with this pipeline safety reauthorization bill. So, thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And I will call up the second panel. All right, I'd like to welcome now our next panel of witnesses, Mr. Carl Weimer, Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Trust, Mr. Andrew Black, President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines, Chief Dan Eggleston, EFO, CFO, CMO, President and Chairman of the Board, International Association of Fire Chiefs, Mr. Richard Kuprowitz, President of Accufax, Inc., Mr. Robin Rorick, Vice President of Midstream and Industry Operations, American Petroleum Institute, and Mr. L.G. Holstein, Senior Director for Strategic Planning, Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you for being here today. Look forward to your testimony. I ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' statements, full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. And as with the previous panel, since your written testimony has been made part of the record, subcommittee will request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. So we will begin with Mr. Weimer. You're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lipinski and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak about pipeline safety today. Before we get into various pipeline safety issues, let me give you a brief overview of where we stand today regarding the safety of pipelines in this country. While everyone testifying today supports the goal of zero incidents, we still have a long way to go to reach that goal. According to PHMSA data, since the Pipes Act was signed less than 3 years ago, there have been over 1,700 reportable pipeline failures. Of those failures, nearly 800 are considered significant incidents under PHMSA's definitions, and the number of significant incidents has been increasing over the past decade. For the past 15 years, the emphasis in reducing pipeline incidents has been focused on performance-based integrity management programs. Unfortunately, it would appear that these integrity management programs have not yet lived up to their promise, as significant incident rates within high consequence areas continue to climb for hazardous liquid and gas transmission pipelines. The pipeline safety system that Congress has created plays a part in PHMSA's inability to get things done. One of the large barriers to getting better regulations in place is the cost versus benefit analysis that Congress has uniquely created for only PHMSA. With a large pipeline system where the probability of a failure is low, but the consequence can be huge, it is nearly impossible to pass regulations under the current cost-benefit rules. If you are really interested in long-standing issues such as effective leak detection, automated shutoff valves, in the regulation of over 400,000 miles of unregulated gathering lines, then the cost-benefit language in the statute needs to be fixed. PHMSA's penalty authority provided by Congress results in civil penalties that are economically insignificant to many operators and are much smaller than those imposed by some states. The wording in the statute for criminal penalties also does not align with the better wording for PHMSA's hazmat operations and creates a very high bar to prove. We have provided suggested changes to the statute that can give PHMSA more flexibility in penalty assessment in the ability to bring criminal charges on companies in the rare cases where that is warranted. As currently written by Congress, the pipeline safety statutes do not prohibit the release of gas or hazardous liquid from a pipeline. Under current PHMSA rules, and as determined by recent court rulings, an operator can cause a significant incident without necessarily having violated a safety regulation. In other words, under PHMSA's rules, an operator has to have a plan for operating and testing their pipeline, but they don't necessarily have to have a plan that works. To close that loophole, we ask that you add language to make clear that the intent of the statute is to avoid releases of gas and hazardous liquids. In the Pipes Act, Congress asked the GAO to produce important reports on the integrity management program for both natural gas and hazardous liquid pipelines after the new rules PHMSA has been working on since 2010 are published. Since those rules have yet to be published and may be delayed further, these important reports are not yet due. The current integrity management rules have been in place for over a decade, are well understood, and NTSB has done a study on its effectiveness. So we ask that Congress direct GAO to produce these important reports as soon as possible instead of waiting for the proposed rules. Congress should also ignore industry calls for relaxation of class location rules because integrity management is in place until these GAO reports are done and the number of incidents under integrity management shows a downward trend. Also in the Pipes Act, Congress directed PHMSA to make it clear that the Great Lakes, coastal beaches, and marine coastal waters are considered unusually sensitive areas. This mandate is yet to be accomplished. The need to do this came as a surprise to us, since clearly these areas are unusually sensitive. We were also surprised to learn that PHMSA does not currently have a way to define and map all such areas. Congress should ask GAO to do a study of whether PHMSA's definitions and identification of such areas, along with commercially navigable waterways, are consistent with other environmental regulations, and whether PHMSA currently has GIS data layers that allow the agency and industry to know where such boundaries are and uses this data to ensure pipeline operators are accurately identifying these areas. Congress should also mandate that such areas be made public so state and local governments, along with the public, can ensure that PHMSA and pipeline companies are correctly designating such important areas. I see my time is about up, so I want to thank you again for inviting me to testify today, and I'm glad to answer any questions and work with the committee as you move forward on reauthorization.
Thank you, Mr. Weimer. Now, Mr. Black, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I'm Andy Black, President and CEO of the Association of Oil Pipelines. AOPL represents the owners and operators of liquid pipelines transporting crude oil, refined products like gasoline, diesel fuel, jet fuel, and home heating oil, and industrial products like propane and ethane. We have over 55 member companies transporting over 21 billion barrels of crude oil and petroleum products annually, over a 215,000-mile network of pipelines. Pipelines are the safest way to deliver the energy Americans use and need every day. No other mode of transportation is as safe for the American people or the environment as pipelines. And pipelines are getting safer. Over the last 5 years, pipeline operators have reduced the number of pipeline incidents impacting people and the environment by 20%. This is government data publicly available from PHMSA. PHMSA data also shows pipeline incidents caused by incorrect operation impacting people and the environment are down 38% over the last 5 years, and pipeline incidents caused by corrosion, cracking, or weld failure impacting people and the environment are down 35% over that period. The pipeline industry and AOPL member companies work hard to improve pipeline safety. We're transparent about where we are doing well and where we can do better. The statistics I shared come from the performance report we develop jointly each year with the American Petroleum Institute analyzing pipeline safety data. We use this analysis to guide our pipeline safety programs, focusing on key safety issues. Through this safety effort, the pipeline industry has addressed key safety recommendations from Congress, the NTSB, PHMSA, and issues identified through analysis of pipeline safety data. Recent safety accomplishments include developing new best practices for finding and fixing cracking in pipelines, managing leak detection programs, responding to pipeline emergencies, and applying safety management systems to pipelines. Industry also just released an updated best practice for inspecting and performing maintenance on pipelines utilizing the latest inspection technologies and analytical techniques. Harnessing technology to advance pipeline safety is a theme we are pursuing across industry, and we urge Congress to adopt as well. For example, high-tech tools can now scan pipelines like an MRI or an ultrasound at the doctor's office. Pipeline operators have the opportunity to find more issues early, perform preventative maintenance, and keep pipelines operating safely. The problem is, federal regulations can't keep pace with fast-moving technology innovations. Outdated PHMSA regulations sometimes conflict with the latest knowledge and techniques. Congress can do more to allow PHMSA and pipeline operators to improve safety by harnessing technology and innovations, such as creating a pilot program to test pipeline safety technologies and approaches, as the Administrator alluded to earlier, authorizing a voluntary information sharing program encouraging joint stakeholder problem solving, requiring regular PHMSA and stakeholder review of pipeline safety research and development advances, and encouraging voluntary discovery, disclosure, correction, and prevention of pipeline safety violations. Next, protecting pipeline safety and the environment from attacks on pipelines is a top reauthorization priority for AOPL. Pipelines are the safest way to deliver the energy we use every day. However, pipelines are industrial facilities we must respect to keep them operating safely. Recent attacks on pipelines, either by turning valves in ways that threaten ruptures, or shooting guns directly at pipelines, or blowtorching holes in pipelines, are dangerous. Members of the public, surrounding communities, and the environment could easily be put in danger by attacks on pipeline facilities that could result in a spill or an explosion. Congress should deter future attacks against pipeline facilities by closing loopholes in the scope of criminal liability placed in federal pipeline safety laws by previous Congresses on a bipartisan basis. AOPL also recommends improving PHMSA programs and regulations by easing hiring and retention of PHMSA inspectors, improving due process and enforcement proceedings, tailoring requirements to pipeline operating status, adjusting incident reporting requirements for inflation, and incorporating the latest best practices on inspection, repair, and tank maintenance. I look forward to answering any of your questions on these proposals, our improving pipeline safety performance record, or the actions the pipeline industry is taking to improve pipeline safety further. Thank you again for the opportunity for us to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Black. I now recognize Chief Eggleston for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lipinski and Ranking Member Balderson and members of the subcommittee. I'm Dan Eggleston, President and Chairman of the Board of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the Fire Chief for Albemarle County, Virginia, Department of Fire Rescue. Thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing on pipeline safety. The U.S. transports approximately 2/3 of its domestic energy supplies in more than 2.7 million miles of pipeline. In our opinion, the use of pipelines is one of the safest ways to transport hazardous materials across the nation. However, when accidents occur, local emergency responders must be prepared, trained, and equipped to respond. During a pipeline incident, the local fire department will be required to stabilize the incident, notify the community, and if necessary, evacuate affected homes and businesses, extinguish any resulting fires, and prevent the loss of life and property. An effective response requires pipeline operators, local fire departments, and other state and local officials to work together. This cooperation cannot start on the day of the incident. It requires the public and the private sector to train and plan, exercise, and equip themselves well before the event. As committee examines the reauthorization of pipeline safety programs at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, the IFC recommends the committee consider the following 3 actions. First, promote coordination between local authorities and pipeline operators. Local emergency planning committees are designed to bring together industry officials, local emergency responders, and other affected stakeholders to plan and exercise for potential pipeline and hazardous material incidents. Currently, there are over 3,000 known LEPCs around the nation. However, it's unclear of how many of these LEPCs are active. The IFC is using a grant from PHMSA, Community Safety Emergency Planning Response and Outreach Program, to bolster LEPCs. We are bringing first responders, emergency managers, pipeline operators together to coordinate emergency response plans. Also, we are educating citizens about where pipelines are located in their communities and what steps they should take in case of an incident. The IFC will use its work to develop best practices for LEPCs to prepare for pipeline and other hazardous material incidents. We ask that you authorize and fund PHMSA's Community Safety Grant. We also ask that you continue to authorize and fund the $1.5 million for PHMSA's Pipeline Safety Information Grant. This program can serve as a useful tool for helping fire departments learn about pipelines in their jurisdictions and prepare for any incidents. The number 2 recommendation is to support training and exercise programs that bring stakeholders together. Pipeline operators and local emergency responders should develop emergency response plans well ahead of time. They should also meet regularly and exercise them throughout the year, not just once. The IFC is working with pipeline operators such as TransCanada to help communities develop pipeline annexes to their emergency operations plans. We use a whole community approach to bring together pipeline operators, emergency responders, and community leaders. In some cases, we have hosted public town hall meetings. We then follow up with tabletop exercise to test these plans and revise them as necessary. Training is also extremely important. At the moment, 60% of fire departments providing hazmat response have not formally trained all of their personnel. The IFC has developed resources like the Rule Guide for Rail and Pipeline Incident Response and Rail Emergency and Pipeline Incident Information Visor cards to help fire departments train and respond to an incident. We also have developed online training in cooperation with the National Association of State Fire Marshals. This online training is especially important for those departments such as volunteer departments in rural areas. The IFC recommends that local fire chiefs reach out to pipeline operators and take advantage of training opportunities that pipeline operators may provide. And the third and final recommendation is to support funding for equipment and staffing for local fire departments. Fire departments, especially in rural areas, may not have the equipment needed to respond to a complex incident like a pipeline rupture. The Assistance to Firefighter Grant Program provides matching funds for local fire departments to purchase the necessary equipment for pipeline incidents and other hazards. The SAFER Grant Program provides matching grants for both hiring firefighters and recruiting volunteers to help fire departments staff necessary staff in communities bordering pipelines. We appreciate the continued support from Congress that's shown in these programs and ask you each fund these at $405 million each in FY 2020. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. Pipeline leaks and ruptures are very complex incidents. They require planning, training, and having the right tools and equipment in place to save lives and property. Americans' fire chiefs look forward to working with the community and the committee to reauthorize the pipeline safety programs. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Next, I'll recognize for 5 minutes Mr. Cooperwitz.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Make sure your microphone's on.
I am president of AccuFacts Incorporated, based in Redmond, Washington. I have authored numerous papers on pipeline safety, with the most recent a March 22nd, 2019 paper for West Whiteland Township, Pennsylvania, identifying possible intrastate transmission pipeline safety regulations for that state. My provided CV should easily demonstrate my qualifications to testify today on additional pipeline safety needs. Since my time is limited, I will focus on 6 major regulatory issues that I believe should be addressed by Congress in any PHMSA reauthorization effort. Item 1, Congress should eliminate the unique requirement that PHMSA show that for any proposed new safety regulations, the safety benefits outweigh the cost. Pipeline events are usually low probability, very high consequence events that are not adequately or appropriately captured using cost-benefit analysis. Recent pipeline failures have demonstrated how quickly the consequences of pipeline failure can easily exceed multiple billions, with a B, of dollars. Much needed improvements in pipeline safety regulation are being delayed or prevented by this unique requirement, and Congress should remove this obstructive approach from PHMSA's safety rulemaking obligation. Major item 2, additional liquid and gas transmission integrity management regulation improvements are needed. Initial performance-based pipeline safety regulations for transmission pipelines promulgated in the early 2000s, known as TIMP-1, are not working as intended. My experience investigating too many recent liquid and gas pipeline ruptures indicates that TIMP-1 needs serious improvement. After a considerable number of years of effort, PHMSA developed suggested transmission integrity management improvements, often identified as TIMP-2, for transmission pipelines, both liquid and gas. These suggested improved regulations have been stalled for the last couple of years. Major item 3, current area classification regulations for gas transmissions pipeline safety regulations should not be changed or weakened. Given the current weakness and incomplete state of TIMP regulations, I cannot recommend nor suggest weakening current safety factors established by existing area classification regulations for gas transmission pipelines. Major item 4, gas gathering minimum pipeline safety regulation needs serious improvement. Recent gathering pipeline rupture failures clearly demonstrate that minimum federal pipeline safety regulations are clearly not working in this area and improvements are warranted. I recommend the regulatory efforts in this area focus on 3 issues: simplifying the definition of gas gathering. 2, requiring all gathering lines to meet minimum standards meant to protect the public. 3, follow similar integrity management processes related to TIMP-2, PHMSA developed improvements. Gas gathering pipeline rupture failure dynamics and actual impact areas are the same as that of gas transmission pipelines. The public should thus also be made aware of gas gathering infrastructure in their area, protected by basic common sense standards, such as one-call mapping requirements, integrity management, and yes, emergency response, that already apply to similar risk transmission pipelines. Major item 5, release detection regulations should focus on 2 efforts. 1, remote rapid rupture release identification, and 2, leak releases which require different technical approaches than that for ruptures. Remote release detection is a reasonable idea and should be advanced by new, prudent pipeline safety regulations that encourage the application and development of such efforts. And lastly, major item 6, regulations for the placement of remote operated mainline valving for liquid and gas pipelines are badly needed. Valves play an important safety role in the event of pipeline rupture. It is time to incorporate clear requirements for such valving into pipeline safety regulations. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to being of some assistance to the committee in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooperwitz. Chair now recognize Mr. Rourke for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lipinski, Ranking Member Crawford, and members of the subcommittee for having API here today to speak about our industry's proactive efforts in pipeline safety and our priorities for pipeline safety reauthorization. My name is Robin Rourke, and I serve as the Vice President for Midstream and Industry Operations at the American Petroleum Institute, a trade association of more than 620 members representing all segments of the oil and natural gas industry. In my role, I am responsible for issues related to the gathering, processing, storage, and transportation of oil and natural gas and their products. Pipelines remain one of the safest ways to deliver energy we use every day. However, to reach our industry's goal of zero incidents and ensure consumer access to clean, abundant, and affordable energy, it is imperative that the regulatory environment and the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration be positioned to meet current and future pipeline safety challenges. Although we recognize and appreciate PHMSA's efforts to implement past congressional mandates, more work needs to be done to institute practical and performance-based regulations for pipelines and LNG facilities. Thus, as Congress considers the reauthorization of PHMSA and other safety programs, we encourage strong consideration of industry priorities that will maximize our investment in people, technology, and safety culture to effectively advance safety. Right now, the United States leads the world in the production of oil and natural gas, and at the same time is the global leader in the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, which are at their lowest levels in 25 years. In the past decade, we have transitioned from an era of energy scarcity and dependence to one of energy abundance and security. This energy renaissance has helped create greater job opportunities for American workers, bolster U.S. manufacturing, strengthen our economy, and enhance our national security interests. And it's helped U.S. families save on their energy bills. In the last decade, U.S. healthcare spending grew by over 70%, and education spending increased over 50%, while household energy spending declined by 10%. Pipelines are critical to ensuring that consumers keep feeling the benefits of our nation's vast energy resources, and they are one of the most efficient ways to safely deliver the energy that Americans use every day. It's estimated that increased investment in our nation's energy infrastructure, including pipelines, is a $1 trillion proposition that could support 1 million jobs per year through 2035 and add up to $100 billion to our GDP annually. Protecting the public and the environment is the top priority for pipeline and LNG operators and a central component to the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of energy infrastructure. Ultimately, the development of a comprehensive safety system must continue to be the product of a shared commitment from our regulator, industry, and other stakeholders. Together, we can effectively focus on appropriate prevention and response practices through an application of regulations, leading industry practices, the use of technology, and alignment on research priorities. At the direction of Congress, PHMSA has been working on the development of several significant safety regulations for oil and natural gas pipelines. API and its members appreciate the emphasis PHMSA has placed in addressing congressional mandates and NTSB recommendations through these rulemakings. Based on the robust, transparent, and balanced Pipeline Advisory Committee process that these regulations underwent, we support the publication of the final gas transmission and hazardous liquid rule, the last of which was recently submitted to OMB. However, for other remaining significant safety rulemakings, including repair criteria for oil pipelines, class locations for gas pipelines, and LNG facility safety, we would ask that PHMSA not lose sight of the importance of a holistic, performance-based regulatory approach that maximizes the industry's ability to use the latest advances in new technologies and engineering techniques to manage safety risks. As an industry, we are committed to safety in all of our operations and consider regulations a base from which to build. API continues to develop and revise critical standards following the accreditation process of the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. One in particular, API Recommended Practice 1173 on pipeline safety management systems is critical in providing a foundational framework for managing complex operations. Through strong commitment and aggressive implementation of this voluntary program, RP 1173 has helped many of our pipeline operators effectively manage risk, promote best practices, continuously improve safety and performance, and build a strong organizational safety culture. Let me close by once more emphasizing that the oil and natural gas industry is committed to promoting safety in all of its operations while it strives to ensure that American families and businesses can safely and efficiently access affordable and reliable energy. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke. Chair now recognizes Mr. Holstein for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll focus my remarks on PHMSA's regulation of the transportation and storage part of the natural gas industry, because natural gas, which as you know is mostly methane, that leaks from pipelines not only creates dangerous conditions for people and communities, it also contributes to and accelerates climate change. Methane is some 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over the first 20 years following its release. And the atmospheric damage that it causes, which includes the amounts accumulating in the atmosphere, combined to cause 25% of the global warming that we are experiencing today. Atmospheric concentrations of methane have increased 164% over the past 250 years, which is a direct result of human activities. Therefore, decisions made now about methane emissions will have a major impact on the rate at which the climate changes over the lifetimes of many Americans living now and spanning the next several generations. Methane also negatively affects human health. When it's released, other chemicals are often released as well, including cancer-causing benzene and also ozone, which contributes to smog formation. The good news is that detecting methane emissions from oil and gas operations, including pipelines and storage facilities, is both feasible and highly cost-effective. It's also getting better with every passing year. For example, Environmental Defense Fund worked with Google Earth with their street mapping cars, and we've been able to map gas leaks, including relatively small ones, from distribution pipelines in 12 cities around the United States. Another example, Picaro Incorporated, which is a leading vendor of natural gas leak detection equipment, did a major project recently with Public Service Electric and Gas in New Jersey, which I might note is also my home state, and found that the accuracy of its mobile methane emissions detection systems is some 1,000 times greater than that of legacy systems. It's able to detect methane at the scale of 1 part per billion. These kinds of high-sensitivity, advanced leak detection systems are mounted on vehicles and on aircraft, including drones, and can quickly locate gas leaks and help quantify them. In another study, ICF International concluded that methane emissions from the North American oil and gas sector could be cut by over 40% using equipment already on the market at a cost of less than 1 penny per 1,000 cubic feet of gas produced annually. Moreover, that study found that the value of gas not emitted into the atmosphere as a result of detection and mitigation measures amounted to well over $500 million a year. Accordingly, we believe that PHMSA must move in the direction of more reliable and comprehensive inspections of pipelines to ensure that those kinds of modern advanced leak detection systems are implemented throughout the gas transportation and storage supply chain. Now, looking ahead, and I want to say a couple of words about gas gathering lines, we see that there are over 300,000 miles of new onshore gas gathering lines that are expected to be built over the next 20 years. That's on top of the 435,000 miles of gas gathering lines already in place. The technology to prevent gas leaks from those thousands of miles of gathering lines and to find and fix them quickly when they do happen is here. It is cost-effective, it's good for the environment, it has the potential to save enormous amounts of natural gas that otherwise would be wasted. First, however, PHMSA must learn where those gathering lines actually are. Accordingly, Congress should ensure that PHMSA requires gathering line operators to participate in the National Pipeline Mapping System. Communities and first responders across America need to know where those lines are. 2 or 3 quick things in terms of additional congressional actions we believe are needed. We think there is no longer any reason, if there ever were one, to shield poor performers from the consequences of their decisions and actions. So we think that one of the things should happen is the elimination of the current cap on civil penalties. Second, Congress should remove the exemptions from PHMSA's requirements for safety-related condition reporting. And finally, and very importantly, and I have not heard it mentioned today, is the budget. None of the recommendations you'll hear today will matter in the long run unless Congress rejects the administration's PHMSA budget proposals. The President's budget request for FY 2020 includes a funding cut of almost 10% for pipeline safety, as well as additional staffing reductions at PHMSA. PHMSA must have the resources necessary this year and beyond to do its work if these conversations about its responsibilities and programs are to have any meaning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify.
I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their testimonies. We'll now move on to member questions. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. PHMSA's regulatory requirements are unique among regulatory agencies. And I want to ask Mr. Weimer and Mr. Krupowitz, what are the safety implications of PHMSA having to undergo a cost-benefit analysis where it must have quantifiable benefits that exceed cost before being able to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking? And why do you recommend Congress eliminate this unique requirement for PHMSA? So, Mr. Weimer, if you can go first.
Sure, thank you for the question. We recognize the cost-benefit in the statute as being unique. I think PHMSA, pipeline safety side, is one of the few agencies that has such a thing. We don't disagree that cost-benefit's an important thing to look at during regulations, but it's required of all regulators as part of OMB and through executive orders. But since it's in the statute, it gives the industry a unique legal hook to argue with regulations. And the way that works is, I think somebody earlier today asked what the value of human life is. And when you do the cost-benefit analysis that PHMSA uses, they use a figure of about $9 or $10 million as the benefit of a human life. So if you have a tragedy like San Bruno that kills 8 people and you go through a cost-benefit to look at installing new valves on a pipeline, and you say that over the course of 10 years you're going to prevent 10 lives from being lost, that would be worth about $100 million. At the same time, if you look at what the cost would be for the industry to put a valve on every mile of pipeline that it might be required, like based on the NTSB recommendations, it may be that those valves, and I'm just making numbers up, cost $1 million a piece, and you might have to put 400 of them nationwide. So that's worth $400 million. So the cost of implementing automated valves way outweighs the benefit of the human lives you're going to save. Now, that was a very basic overview, and it's much more complex, but that's the way the statute works, and that industry can go to court then and argue that the statute wasn't based on cost-benefit because it's in the statute. You can't argue that just at OMB, where it does make sense to weigh those things. So that's why we think it should be removed.
Mr. Krupowitz, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd ask, in my 20 years kind of watching the development and promulgation of pipeline safety regulations in the fields, I've seen PHMSA's frustration in trying to push development of some very good ideas, and the cost-benefit process slows the whole thing down, and then it gets lost in, in bureaucratic procedures on many things. And so my comment earlier about, I used to think $1 billion was a lot of money in terms of some of these tragedies, and you've heard just a few that I've investigated today in more detail. The analysis is all wrong. The nature of the failures are such that cost-benefit does not set itself up. Its primary objective from where I stand is to deregulate. So let's call it what it is. Now, it's up to Congress to decide how they want to deal with that.
And that's a very interesting point you raised about the actually measuring the benefits. So it's something we're going to have to look at closely here. But I want to move on to Chief Eggleston. And I want to ask, what can Congress do to improve the information sharing between pipeline operators and local communities and emergency responders, so you have the type of information that you need.
Well, we truly believe that point of contact is best handled through the LEPCs, that they're throughout the nation been proven to help share information across localities in terms of hazards in their areas. So continue to help fund the grant programs that support the LEPCs, as we think is the best way to go forward.
I know when I mentioned in my opening statement that in Romeoville, in my district, there's a leak, and the story is that the leak was detected, and someone had to go walk along the pipeline to figure out, get any information on whose pipeline this was, to even know who to contact, and it'd be much better if that information was available along with other information. I want to quickly ask, in the short amount of time, just a quick question, Mr. Holstein. You talked about, and I had read about Google finding, going around with their mapping, finding the leaks. What happened with that information? Was it actually used to fix leaks, or what happened?
We posted that information, Mr. Chairman, on our website, and so anyone can see it today. And we specifically encouraged local citizens in those communities, places like Boston and Indianapolis and 8 other cities around the country, encouraged people to discuss that amount of leakage. In many older cities in particular, we found there was a great deal of leakage. However, we were careful to say that we were not challenging the classification system that's used by PHMSA and by gas distribution utilities in terms of the decisions they make about how quickly to respond, how urgently to respond to different types of leaks. After all, a big leak out in a field is less of a safety threat than a small leak in a small apartment. So mostly what we were trying to demonstrate is that new technologies exist to do very accurate and very inexpensive and also very rapid surveys of, in that case, streets in major cities. But the same kinds of technologies can be deployed elsewhere.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now will recognize Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question to the panel, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today, is for Mr. Black. Mr. Black, thank you for testifying before the subcommittee today regarding pipeline safety. I think we all can agree that PHMSA regulations shouldn't prevent an operator from applying the best available technology and inspection tools to conduct assessments and address potential problems. If PHMSA was to develop a pilot program that allows companies to test and use new pipeline technologies and offer exemptions from agency regulations, how could we do so responsibly and ensure the expectations meet adequate safety levels?
Thank you, Congressman. PHMSA has authority in motor carrier statute to issue pilot programs, and we recommend that here for pipeline safety so that we can harness the benefits of new technologies, just like you're saying. Advances in pipeline inspection technologies and in analytical techniques have really increased recently, and they've outpaced PHMSA regulation. With a pilot program, PHMSA could test technologies and approaches that they believe would have an equivalent level of safety. They could gain real-world experience and data that they could use then to have more confidence moving forward on regulations. We believe safety would be improved by using these latest technologies on when to inspect, when to perform maintenance on pipelines, and to use the benefits of improving technology.
Thank you for that answer. A follow-up with that. Can you provide any examples of innovative technologies that can be used to promote pipeline safety operations to outdated PHMSA regulations?
Pipelines are inspected by inline inspection or diagnostic robots. You hear us refer to them often as smart pigs. They travel inside a pipeline like using technologies like MRI or an ultrasound at the doctor's office. They collect terabytes of data. They give us more information than we've ever had before about smaller and smaller features. With that information, we can prioritize risks and get out there and perform preventive maintenance to address an issue before it becomes a problem. Outdated PHMSA regulations might suggest a schedule and a prioritization of risks different than modern know-how and engineering principles would tell us. So with a pilot program, PHMSA can put these ideas to use, gather information, and then if they are proven beneficial, apply those across federal regulations, benefit safety across the entire industry.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Rurick, also thank you for being here today. My next question is, how can the pipeline industry and API member companies work with PHMSA to ensure the agency is able to retain qualified and expert pipeline inspectors?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. It is one of our core items as we discuss pipeline authorization to make sure that PHMSA, as the regulator, is properly resourced to fulfill its mission, but then also has properly trained individuals with the expertise needed to provide the proper oversight for our industry. Certainly they have run into challenges with both attracting good talent and then training them, and then when they've got trained talent, they often lose them, those trained personnel actually back to industry. So I think it's important for Congress to work very closely with the agency to ensure that they're taking full advantages of the government programs that allow them to provide compensatory pay to their folks, so that and look at other innovative ways to try to attract their employees to stay at their agencies.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back my remaining time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Fletcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks to all the witnesses this morning for your testimony and for your written testimony, which I've reviewed. I want to follow up on a couple of the things that we've talked about here. And one thing, I just want to follow up on Mr. Black's testimony, but open this to anyone who wants to comment on it, hearing about the pilot program and some of these ideas. Are there enough avenues and resources at PHMSA for the agency to consider this data that the new technology can provide and the potential safety benefits that would arise from it? If that's for anybody to answer.
I think there are enough resources for PHMSA to use this. PHMSA has a practice of reviewing best practices put out by the ANSI accredited process that Mr. Rourke of API mentioned. There's a new recommended practice on inspecting and repairing pipelines that provides specific proposals for PHMSA to look at that. We've encouraged PHMSA to review those, consider incorporating them into federal regulations. The administrator, I was encouraged to hear, acknowledge that the special permit process is a way for PHMSA to adopt that on a company-specific basis. We encourage them to do that writ large so that we can more quickly let American public and environment benefit from safety. And if not incorporating by federal regulations or the special permit process, we think the pilot program would let PHMSA, with the resources that it has, use these new technologies and techniques.
Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit and ask, with my remaining time, about regulations relating to LNG. So as everyone here knows, the U.S. LNG industry has dramatically changed over the past decade, where many facilities were originally planned as import facilities. The U.S. is now on the verge of becoming a net exporter of oil and gas. So the industry's changed. The regulations governing them haven't really kept pace. That's something I raised earlier. For anyone on the panel, what reforms and regulations are necessary for the LNG export facilities so that the U.S. facilities can continue to be competitive in the global marketplace, but that adequate safety standards are in place here?
Congresswoman, you're exactly right. Just in the last week, 2 new formerly import facilities have been started down the process, according to the announcement of their owners, into export facilities on the Gulf Coast. So that's adding 2 more. What we need to keep in mind are 2 things very quickly. One is the enormous amount of natural gas that will, over time, flow to those facilities, and the vast areas across America from which that gas will come. And that's why I talked about the hundreds of thousands of gathering lines that are insufficiently overseen by PHMSA now and need to have much more comprehensive leak detection and repair protocols, but we must begin by mapping them so we know where the heck they are. The second thing is, with respect to storage facilities, and LNG facilities do entail lots of storage facilities, we need two things. We need a comprehensive rule from PHMSA governing storage facilities, and you may remember the terrible Aliso Canyon disaster in California a couple of years ago. And secondly, states that have their own implemented storage facility regulatory programs should be able to carry those programs out with respect to storage facilities within their borders. Right now, they're not free to do that with regard to all facilities, particularly interstate storage facilities.
Okay, that's helpful. Yes.
I'd just build off of something that moves at minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit commands much respect. So your line of questioning is very appropriate. You know, where does PHMSA end on its resource allocation here? Because the last thing I want to do is put these gentlemen in a situation they can't win. And so we need to have some focus on that effort in the future, given the number of new facilities.
Thank you. Mr. Rourke, do you have a
Well, just a
comment
quick
on that?
comment, Congresswoman. PHMSA is in the process of looking at some safety regulations for LNG facilities. I think it's important. I think you stated it correctly, and Mr. Holstein added it as well. The growth that is going to come from continued export is going to continue. So it's important that as PHMSA looks at developing these regulations, that they take a risk-based approach to this, and that they also consider the process safety management systems in accordance with that as well.
Thank you. I will yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. And the chair will now recognize Mr. Babin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, all expert witnesses, for coming here and testifying, giving us your experiences. I want to thank you all for helping us transport liquid energy in the safest manner possible. I'm sure a number of you have heard about the fire, which was down in my district, represent the 36th district in Texas, in Deer Park, Texas. I have more petrochemical refining facilities than any other place in the land. This was at a terminal facility a few weeks ago that caught the attention of the national news, and I was actually down in Houston in the district at the time, had the opportunity to go see this facility. This dangerous fire, which impacted thousands of lives, highlights the need for us to do a better job to secure and protect these hazardous materials. Every one of us, and truly the entire country, is dependent on this industry's acute attention to the safe transportation of energy products and other hazardous materials, as they are essential to our daily lives and our commerce. Could you please, Mr. Black, if you don't mind, I have a question. Could you please cite specific accidents and spills in the past, what you have learned from them, and how the regulatory environment and technology of today that would prevent that same accident from happening again? I think it's vital that we in this industry try to do as much introspection so that we don't repeat history.
The liquid pipeline industry has a long tradition and a comprehensive practice of trying to learn from incidents. I was sorry to hear about the one on the coast. My understanding is that was caused by fire. I was pleased to hear that wasn't caused by the problem with the integrity of the tank. But when there are lessons to be learned from that, either from the operator or for government regulators, we're going to be ready to share those within industry to try to prevent anything like that from happening. There are significant pipeline incidents where we've looked at recommendations from NTSB, the safety reports, industry sharing, and we've adopted recommended practices on finding and fixing cracking in pipelines, improving leak detection programs, improving emergency response. We're ready to do that. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And then could you share a little bit more with the subcommittee about what pipeline operators are doing to improve their pipeline safety? And additionally, how are you working to incorporate the best practices which were recommended by the NTSB?
Well, NTSB, as a result of, after the Marshall, Michigan incident in 2010, issued a series of recommendations the industry has met. One was to adopt safety management systems, and we've issued API Recommended Practice 1173. The response, the NTSB said, exceeded expectations, and that's a hosanna that they don't give often. Other cases that we've done from Marshall was there was issues needed to be, there were improvements in finding and fixing cracks in pipelines, and that was recommended practice 1176. We found that safety data needed to be integrated more from different types of inspections, technical report 1178. Leak detection programs were found at fault in the Marshall incident, so the entire industry has learned through that, through the adoption of API Recommended Practice 1175, so that there's now more constant monitoring of pipelines by trained control room operators. NTSB made a recommendation out of a Centerville, Virginia incident recently where we found that there was cracking associated with a dent, and industry is now working on technical report 1183 on managing those cracks. These are a couple of examples of specific ways operators are learning from incidents, trying to improve upon that, and then share industry-wide implementing improvements throughout all companies to try to avoid incidents.
Very good. I appreciate that very much. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Babin. I will now recognize Mr. Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let's see, Chief Eagleson, in my other responsibilities on Capitol Hill, I am on Homeland Security and chairman of Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to make sure that you and your colleagues have the training and the safety equipment and the things to respond to these emergencies and be prepared well in advance of them. And so, you know, I take a lot of pride in that as well. Let me ask you, in your testimony, you note that it wasn't clear how many LEPCs are active in carrying out their missions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be a disconnect between LEPCs, local pipeline operators, and other external stakeholders. What happened, and why does this disconnect exist, and what can be done to fix the disconnect? You know, it's critical that the LEPCs are up and effectively running.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate your service with Homeland Security as well. I'm not sure why some LEPCs are dysfunctional or don't exist. I can speak from my own experience in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area. We have a very active LEPC, and it's mainly driven by the community's demand for transparency and information, and my responsibility to ensure that our citizens are protected. So that's my main driver. I reach out and connect with industry, and they are grateful to meet with me and discuss the hazards in my community. So I think it takes a will of both the locality as well as industry to meet and form the LEPC. That's basically who it's made of. So it's responsibilities on both sides. I will tell you that I have previously worked in a community that had strong industry, and we had 100% complete transparency working with industry and had one of the strongest LEPCs that I remember being associated with. And we had a number of hazardous material incidents in those industries, and they went very smooth because of the communication and the information sharing that happened. Mm-hmm. And when I look at the hazards across our country related to pipeline, it really starts off with partnerships with the operators and information. Because when we send our firefighters out the door to respond to an incident with this kind of magnitude, we need to arm them with as much information as we can, because I don't want to send them into an incident blindly, because it's not fair to the citizens and not fair to my firefighters.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So you think it becomes a issue around the the community sometimes is
Yes, sir.
in terms of how important this interaction is?
It is. I think it also comes down to funding. Some rural communities cannot afford to properly fund their LEPC, so I think that's where the IFC is working with PHMSA to help fund adequately some of those LEPCs that serve the rural areas but tend to have hazards related to the pipelines that run through them. So in some cases, it's a community activity. In a lot of cases, it comes down to funding.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony, you mentioned that your organization is using your community safety emergency planning response and outreach grant to help LEPCs prepare for incidents in their communities. I'm interested in learning exactly how you're making sure that the community LEPCs are prepared to respond to the pipeline emergencies. Can you describe some of the programs you have with the LEPC to ensure that preparedness?
Certainly. We have created some products and training in cooperation with one company, TransCanada here, to provide training to local responders in the LEPC. There's a number of other training products that we've had developed as well that I'd be more than happy to send you after the fact.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will yield back the balance of my 1 second.
Thank you. Chair will now recognize Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Mr. Black, when individual companies in the individual states install gathering lines, they have to permit them, they have to locate them. The local municipality, the state regulatory agencies know where they are, know who installed them. Is that generally correct, or do we have no idea where all these gathering lines are?
I can speak to liquid gathering, where there's more knowledge with states. I think some states are different, but in those states that have production, have for a long time, there are robust regulations in place. PHMSA also regulates certain liquid gathering above certain inches diameter. So I believe there's great awareness, but I can't speak to each state.
I mean, is there any reason to believe that the company itself, that with a significant investment and a significant liability, doesn't have a great stake in making sure that they're placed safely, that they're maintained correctly, and that their whereabouts is known and documented? And aren't they also required to do those things by the individual states? I mean, the point is that I think the states do a pretty darn good job, and the implication that the states can't handle this seems to be, to me, I mean, I come from Pennsylvania, and we do a lot of this stuff here, and we think we do it pretty well.
Well, I'm much more familiar with the transmission pipelines that we represent. I understand what you say to be the case. I think you're right.
PHMSA covers the nation's about almost 2.5 or over 2.5 million miles of gas and hazardous liquid pipelines, accounting for the transport of 65% of the energy consumed domestically. Given all the concerns raised about their track record of delays in promulgating congressionally mandated safety regulations, what is the overall safety record of the liquids pipelines as a general rule? Do you know?
We have not been waiting for PHMSA to adopt regulations for us to continue improving safety. Got a broad series of strategic plan initiatives that pay off. In the last 5 years, incidents impacting people and the environment, consensus metrics we all worked on after an NTSB recommendation, are down 20% over the last 5 years. Pipeline safety continues to improve.
All right. Over the same period, about how much has the industry seen growth, both in terms of pipeline, mileage, and barrels delivered? Because you're talking about being, down 20%. What's the growth at the same period of time?
Yeah, you're right, Congressman. We've had considerable growth because of the great resource our country has through shale production. Liquid pipeline miles have, crude and products delivered have increased 44% per year. Crude oil delivered increased 37%. Total mileage has increased 12%. Now, I gave you those stats of 20% decrease in incidents impacting people in the environment. That's not normalized to adopt the growth. That's raw numbers that are decreasing at the same time pipelines are increasing miles and barrels delivered.
Yeah, so it's really a good news story with quite honestly, without federal intervention, or with federal intervention, which generally is impeding the industry, because we're asking you to wait, but you're not waiting in terms of safety, and we appreciate that. Can you elaborate on industry efforts to improve safety across the pipeline infrastructure?
Oh, there's a strategic plan that we have where we analyze safety data to address the issues that are more problematic. Our goal is 0 incidents, and we work towards those. The most recent example is an industry-wide best practice on inspecting and repairing pipelines, API recommended practice 1160, that would adopt the latest technologies and techniques. We hope PHMSA will incorporate those, or Congress will authorize a pilot program so that PHMSA can test those and then use them in all regulations.
All right, I've got a couple other questions for you, which I may submit for the record in the remaining 50 seconds. I want to ask Mr. Rourke for his thoughts on the gathering lines.
With regards to Congressman, so the commitment from the industry with regards to gathering lines for safety?
Yes. The conversation I was having with Mr. Black about documenting their location, safety, and whether it should occur at the state or federal level, and the fact that the states, in my opinion, being from Pennsylvania, we do it pretty well, I think. So, but if there's
yes, sir, and I think a couple of key things to remember first and foremost is that gathering lines in high consequence areas are already regulated. What we are currently working on with PHMSA, and what PHMSA is working on, is some regulation for gathering lines right now, and we are in agreement with the discussions that are taking place right now, which is looking at a diameter size of 12.75 for regulation. So there's a lot of work that is being done. There's a lot of knowledge, but there's also a lot of work that continues to be done on the issue.
I appreciate your time. I yield back.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to, at the risk of more trouble here, I'm going to open it up for a second round of questions. Don't worry, it'll be short. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I just want to ask a quick question, Mr. Weimer. What does the record show in terms of the safety of pipelines in recent history? What data do we have about, are pipelines getting more safe or less safe?
Well, there's a lot of different data out there, and you've heard different parts of it today, and it really depends which piece of it you're looking at. As I said, I was looking at overall data, and since the Pipes Act was signed in 2016, there's been 1,700 reportable failures on pipelines, and almost 800 of those were significant incidents under of PHMSA's definitions. If you look at integrity management, how well it's working, and you go onto PHMSA's website and look, large spills on hazardous liquid pipelines have been increasing over the last decade, and large releases and ruptures on gas transmission pipelines have been increasing. So, you know, we could spend the rest of the afternoon probably cutting and pasting data and coming up with our own stuff, but if you look at the overarching data on PHMSA's website, you'll see that some of the major types of pipelines, the incidents are increasing. And for gas gathering lines that have been mentioned, the 400,000 miles of unregulated ones, we don't know because they're unregulated and no one even keeps track of that. But there's been some significant incidents on those just in the past year, like in our written testimony, we point out the one that killed the 10-year-old child in Texas on a pipeline that was 10 inches in diameter, which is smaller than what API is recommending now for gas gathering lines.
Thank you. With that, I will yield back, and Mr. Balderson, I'll give you, do you have any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, I don't, no, thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Payne is gone. So that wraps it up. Thank all of our witnesses for your testimony today. It's extremely important as we look at pipeline safety reauthorization bill. Thank you for your testimony and your time. And you are dismissed. I want to ask unanimous consent that the record for today's hearing remain open till such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.